Good evening, and welcome back to The Quiet. Before we begin, let me say the only thing that matters here. You do not have to follow this. You do not have to remember any of it. There will be no test in the morning, no point where you are asked to have understood. If your attention drifts, let it drift. If you fall asleep before the first story is finished, then the night has done its work, and so have I. Tonight, we are going to spend a long, slow while with a difficult man who understood something gentle. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. He lived and thought in the German-speaking world of the 1800s, and he had a reputation, mostly earned, for being one of the gloomiest philosophers who ever lived. But underneath the gloom, there was a quiet kindness that most people miss. He paid very close attention to a feeling that almost everyone has and almost no one names. The feeling of wanting to be close to other people and being hurt by that closeness again and again until you begin to wonder whether something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. That is, in a way, the whole of what we have to say tonight, stretched out over 4 unhurried hours. Nothing is wrong with you. The difficulty is older than you are, and a philosopher noticed it 2 centuries ago, and he gave it a picture so simple that a tired mind can hold it. The picture of the porcupines in the cold. We will begin there. Then we will go back and meet the man himself, slowly, without hurry. We will follow his strange and lonely life, and we will look as gently as we can at his picture of the world. And then, in the second half of the night, we will turn toward the softer thing he had to offer, which is not despair at all. It is a way of being alone that does not feel like loneliness. It is a way of keeping the right distance from other people so that you can actually bear to love them. So settle in. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears. Let the phone go dark, and let us begin where he began, in the cold. Chapter 1. The Freezing Porcupines. Late in his life, Schopenhauer wrote down a small parable. It was almost a throwaway, tucked into the second volume of a book of essays and stray thoughts. But it has outlived nearly everything else he wrote, because anyone can feel that it is true. Imagine, he said, a group of porcupines on a bitterly cold winter day. The cold is severe. Each animal, on its own, cannot keep warm. So they draw together, huddling close, sharing the little heat their bodies make. And for a moment, it is better. The warmth begins to gather between them. But porcupines are covered in quills, and the closer they press together for warmth, the more they drive those quills into one another. The comfort turns to pain. So they pull apart, and apart they are warm nowhere, and the cold comes back into them, and it drives them together again. And close together, the quills wound them again, and they scatter again. Back and forth they go, toward each other for warmth, away from each other for the pain, toward and away, and toward and away, all through the freezing dark, until, Schopenhauer said, they discover a certain distance, not pressed together, not scattered apart. A middle distance where they can share just enough warmth to survive, without wounding each other with their quills. And at that distance, and only at that distance, they can bear to be near one another through the night. He did not really mean porcupines, he meant us. Human beings, he was saying, are driven together by the emptiness and coldness of being alone. We cannot make enough warmth by ourselves, and so we reach for each other. We reach for company, for closeness, for someone who will come near. But we are also covered, every one of us, in quills, in the sharp edges of our moods, our needs, our wounds, our opinions, the small cruelties we do not even know we are committing. And so, again and again, the moment we get close enough to share warmth, we begin to hurt each other, and we pull back, and the cold returns, and we reach again. Stop for a moment and feel how familiar that is. The friend you love and cannot spend a whole week with, the family you long to see and are exhausted by within a day. The person you wanted so badly, and then, once they were close, found yourself flinching from. It is not that you failed, it is not that they failed. It is that you are two warm animals, covered in quills, doing the oldest dance there is. And here is the quiet mercy in it. The porcupines are not bad porcupines. They are not being punished. They are simply looking, in the dark, for the distance at which they can survive each other. And when they find it, it is not a failure of love. It is the form love has to take between creatures like them, like us. We will come back to that distance many times tonight. For now, just let the image sit with you. The cold, the reaching, the quills, and somewhere out there in the dark, the exact narrow distance where warmth is possible and the wounding stops. Schopenhauer spent his whole strange life looking for that distance. Let us go and meet him. Chapter 2. The night you feel it most. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not arrive when you are alone. It arrives when you are surrounded. You have felt it. In a room full of talking people, at a table where everyone is laughing, in the middle of a family you genuinely love. A quiet falls inside you, out of nowhere, and you feel, all at once, unreachably far from every warm body in the room. You are not sad, exactly. You are not even sure you want to leave. You just feel the distance, suddenly, like a draft from an open door somewhere behind you. Schopenhauer felt this his whole life, and he refused to pretend he did not. Most of the cheerful philosophy of his age told people that they were social creatures, made for togetherness, and that a good life was a life full of company. He looked at that and thought it was a comfortable lie. Not because company is worthless, but because the promise underneath it, the promise that closeness will finally cure the coldness, is a promise that closeness cannot keep. Notice when the feeling comes to you most sharply. Often it is at night. In the day there is too much to do, too much noise, too many small tasks to keep the mind occupied on the surface of things. But at night, when the tasks are done and the lights are low and the house has gone quiet, the deeper feeling rises. The one that was there all along, underneath the busyness. And you lie in the dark and you feel the whole strange fact of being a separate mind, sealed inside a separate body, unable to fully reach or be reached by anyone, ever. If that is where you are right now, I want you to know that you are in good company, in the oldest sense. Some of the most careful minds who ever lived have lain awake exactly where you are lying, feeling exactly what you are feeling. And one of them, this difficult German, decided not to run from the feeling, but to understand it, to ask what it is really made of. And what he found over many years was not a cure. He did not believe in the cure, but he found something better than a cure. He found a way to make peace with the distance itself. We are going to walk toward that peace slowly. We are not going to rush to the consolation, because rushed consolation never holds. Instead, we are going to sit for a while with the difficulty, the way he did. We are going to look at it directly, in the calm, so that it loses some of its power to frighten. Because a feeling looked at steadily in the quiet is never quite as large as a feeling fled from in the dark. So let yourself feel it, gently, without alarm. The distance, the separateness, the strange loneliness that visits even in a crowd. It is not a flaw in you. It is a fact about being the kind of creature you are. And tonight, for once, we are going to keep it company instead of trying to make it go away. Breathe. There is nothing you have to solve. Let us go on. Chapter 3. What we really want from each other. Before we understand why closeness hurts, we should be honest about what we are actually reaching for when we reach for another person, because it is rarely the simple thing we tell ourselves. We say we want company, but a room full of company can leave us emptier than an empty room. We say we want to be loved, but we have all been loved at some point by someone whose love did not touch the place that was cold. So it is not company as such, and it is not love as such. It is something more particular and more difficult, and Schopenhauer, in his blunt way, kept circling it. What we want underneath is to be known, not admired, not needed, not merely enjoyed, known. Known, we want there to be, somewhere in the world, at least one mind that has seen the actual shape of us, the inside of us, the part that does not show and has not turned away. That is the warmth we are truly after when we huddle close in the cold, not heat on the skin, recognition in the dark. And here is the trouble that runs under the whole night. To be known, you have to be seen. And to be seen, you have to lower the quills, at least a little, at least on one side. You have to let another person close enough to make out the real shape of you. And the moment you do that, you have made yourself woundable. The very closeness that could finally warm you is the closeness that could finally hurt you, and it is the same closeness. There is no version of it where you get the warmth without the risk. They come in one motion, or they do not come at all. This is why the loneliest people are so often not the ones who never tried, They are the ones who tried and were wounded and quietly decided that the warmth was not worth the quills. They pulled back to a safe distance, and at that distance they are safe, and at that distance they are cold. And they tell themselves they prefer it, and sometimes they even believe it, and all the while a part of them is still standing in the snow, wanting to be known. Schopenhauer knew this from the inside. He was a difficult man to be close to, and he knew it, and he suffered from it. He drove people away and then felt the cold of their absence. He wanted recognition so badly that when the world ignored his great book, it wounded him for decades. He was not writing about the porcupines as a detached observer. He was one of the porcupines, out in the cold, quills raised, longing. So when we look at what we want from each other, let us look with some tenderness, including toward ourselves. The wanting is not weakness. The wanting to be known is the most human thing there is. It is simply aimed at something that is very hard to get, and that cannot be gotten without risk. Tonight, we are not going to shame the wanting, we are going to understand it. And understanding, in the quiet, is its own kind of warmth. Let that settle. You are allowed to want to be known. Everyone in every dark room tonight wants the same thing. Let us keep going, slowly, toward the man who made a life out of thinking about it. Chapter 4. The warmth that also wounds. There is a cruelty built into the arrangement, and it is worth naming plainly, once, so that we can stop being surprised by it. The people who can warm you the most are the same people who can wound you the most. These are not two different sets of people. It is one set. The stranger cannot hurt you, not really, because the stranger cannot reach you. Their opinion glances off. Their absence costs you nothing. But that safety is the safety of the cold. The stranger cannot warm you either. It is only when you let someone in, close enough that their warmth reaches the cold place, that they also come into range of doing you real harm. The power to comfort you and the power to hurt you are in the end the same power, which is the power of mattering to you. You cannot hand someone the one without handing them the other. When you let a person become someone whose kindness can save your evening, you have also made them someone whose coldness can ruin your week. That is the deal. There is no closeness that opts out of it. Schopenhauer saw this with painful clarity in his own family, which we will come to. His mother could wound him as no stranger ever could, precisely because whatever else was broken between them, she mattered. The quills were sharpest exactly where the longing for warmth was oldest. Most of the disappointment we carry about relationships comes from not accepting this simple structure. We keep hoping to find the person, or to become the person, for whom closeness is all warmth and no quills. The friend with no sharp edges, the love with no risk. And when the quills inevitably appear, we treat it as evidence that this closeness, in particular, was a mistake, that we picked wrong, that somewhere out there is the frictionless warmth we were promised. But there is no frictionless warmth. Not because your people are flawed, though they are, and not because you are flawed, though you are, but because warmth between separate beings simply comes with quills. To wish for the warmth without the quills is to wish to be close to someone who cannot affect you, which is to wish for something that is not closeness at all. Hear the strange relief in that. If the wounding is not a sign that you chose wrong, then a great deal of the second-guessing can be set down. The friction is not the failure of the closeness. The friction is the evidence of the closeness. A relationship with no capacity to hurt you is a relationship that has not yet reached you. The ache in this light is not the opposite of connection. It is one of its signatures. We are not saying tonight that all wounding must be endured. Some quills are cruelty and should be walked away from, and we will honor that later when we talk about choosing which nearness is worth its price. But the ordinary friction, the small, unavoidable stings of letting real people be real and near, is not a defect to be eliminated. It is the texture of the only warmth there is. Let your grip loosen on the hope for a painless closeness. It was never coming. What is coming, if you let it, is something better and more possible. The right distance, with the right people, at which the warmth outweighs the sting, toward that we are slowly walking. Rest here a moment first. Chapter 5. Manners as the distance we agree to. Schopenhauer added a small, dry observation to the end of his porcupine parable, and it is easy to miss, but it is one of the most useful things he ever said. He said that the moderate distance the porcupines finally discover, the one at which they can bear each other, has a name among human beings. We call it politeness. We call it good manners. At first, that sounds cold. Manners can seem like the enemy of real closeness, a set of stiff rules that keep people at arm's length. But turn it over. Manners are the arm's length, yes, and the arm's length is exactly what makes the huddle survivable. Courtesy is the agreed-upon distance at which two quilled creatures can share a fire without drawing blood. It is not the absence of warmth. It is the structure that lets the warmth last past the first evening. Think of how much damage is done in the world by people who have decided that intimacy means the end of all distance, who believe that because they are close to you, they may say anything, ask anything, intrude anywhere, that the quills no longer count because the love is real. These are the relationships that wound the most, because they have thrown away the very distance that would have let the warmth continue. Closeness without any courtesy is just two animals pressed quill to quill, bleeding and calling it love. And think, on the other side, of the quiet dignity of a little formality kept even among intimates, the please and the thank you that never fall away, the knock on the door, the asking rather than assuming. The small held distances that say, I know you are a separate person with an inside I do not own, and I will not press my quills into you just because I am allowed near. That is not coldness. That is the highest respect one porcupine can pay another. Schopenhauer, who was so often rude, understood the value of the thing he lacked. He saw that manners at their best are not falseness. They are a kind of mercy. They are the acknowledgement that the other person can be hurt and the decision to keep just enough distance that you do not keep hurting them. The finest manners come not from fear of the other person, but from care for them, from a steady awareness that they, too, are a bundle of quills and longing, doing their best in the cold. So, if you have ever felt that you were bad at closeness, ask yourself whether what you actually lacked was distance. Whether the relationships that failed did not fail from too little intimacy, but from too little of the good, protective, courteous distance that would have made the intimacy bearable. Many people who think they are cold are simply people who never learned that a little formality is a gift, not a wall. Tonight, notice the distances you keep and the ones you fail to keep. Notice where a little more courtesy would let more warmth survive. There is no need to change anything now. It is late, and this is only noticing. But hold the strange, freeing idea that the manners you were taught to see as barriers might in fact be the narrow, careful distance at which love does not have to wound. We will build on this later. For now, let it soften you toward the small courtesies. They are older and kinder than they look. Chapter 6. The loneliness inside the crowd. We should stay a little longer with that specific ache, the loneliness that lives inside company, because it is the one that confuses people the most. Ordinary loneliness, the loneliness of the empty house, at least makes sense. You are alone, so you feel alone. But the loneliness that comes in the middle of the party, the family dinner, the crowded train, feels like a betrayal of the rules. You did everything right, you are surrounded by people, and still the cold comes in. Schopenhauer had a hard, clear explanation, and then a softer one underneath it. The hard explanation was this: most gathering, most of what passes for company, is not really an attempt to know one another. It is an attempt to escape the discomfort of being alone with oneself. People come together, he thought, not out of love of company, but out of fear of solitude, out of an inability to bear their own inner emptiness. And when the reason for the gathering is the flight from emptiness, the gathering cannot cure the emptiness. It can only cover it, for a while, with noise. That is why you can feel most alone in the middle of a crowd, because the crowd is not in fact reaching for you, it is reaching for distraction. Everyone in the room is quietly using everyone else as a way not to feel the thing you are feeling. And a sensitive person, sitting in the middle of that, feels the truth of it in their body, feels that all this warmth is somehow not aimed at anyone, and the feeling of that unaimed warmth is colder than an empty room. Now, the softer explanation. The reason it hurts so much when you feel it is that you were built to want the real thing, and the real thing is rare, and a room full of the substitute makes the absence of the real thing louder. If you did not long to be known, the shallow company would not disappoint you. It disappoints you precisely because some deep part of you keeps hoping that this time, in this crowd, the recognition you are after will finally arrive. And when it does not, the hope collapses, and the collapse feels like loneliness. So the loneliness in the crowd is not a sign that you are antisocial or broken. It is a sign that you are still holding out for depth in a place that only offers surface. It is the honorable disappointment of someone who has not given up on being truly met. And here is the quiet counsel that follows, the counsel we will keep returning to. Stop asking the crowd for the thing the crowd cannot give. The wide gathering is for one kind of warmth, a light, pleasant, undemanding warmth, and there is nothing wrong with it as long as you do not ask it to be the deep thing. The deep thing, the being known, comes only in the narrow places, with one or two people, at close range, over long time. When you stop demanding depth from breadth, the crowd stops wounding you, because you have stopped asking it for what it was never going to give. The person who understands this can walk into a party and enjoy it for exactly what it is, a mild and passing warmth, and feel no betrayal when it stays mild, and go home to the deeper solitude without any sense of failure. That is a kind of freedom. It is far off, maybe, from where you are tonight. But it is real, and it is reachable, and Schopenhauer is one of the guides to it. Rest now. We have all night. Chapter 7. Why being understood feels so rare. Let us name the deepest layer of the difficulty before we leave the opening behind and go to meet the man. The reason it is so hard to be known is not only that closeness comes with quills, it is that real understanding between two people is genuinely rare, and it is rare for reasons that no amount of effort can fully fix. Schopenhauer believed that people differ from one another far more on the inside than they appear to on the outside. Two people can use the same words, sit at the same table, share the same history, and be living in inner worlds so different that neither can quite imagine the other's. What one finds unbearable, the other barely notices. What moves one to tears leaves the other cold. And most of the time we paper over this vast inner distance with convention, with small talk, with the shared script of how people are supposed to be, and we call that getting along. But the script is not the same as being understood. The script is what we do instead. He thought this was especially painful for people of unusual depth or sensitivity. The more richly and finely you experience the world, the fewer people there are who experience it in a way close enough to yours to truly meet you. A shallow pond has many neighbors. A deep well has few. And so the very depth that makes your inner life rich is the depth that makes it lonely, because it puts more distance between you and the average run of people you meet. This is not vanity, it is arithmetic. The rarer your inner weather, the rarer the person who has weather like it. If you have spent your life feeling slightly out of step, slightly too much or too intense or too quiet for the rooms you are in, this may be the most important thing you hear tonight. It may not be that you are failing at connection. It may be that you are the kind of person for whom real connection is simply rarer, because there are fewer people whose inner world overlaps enough with yours to make the meeting possible. And rare is not the same as impossible. It only means you must not expect it often, and you must not mistake its rarity for your fault. There is grief in this, and we will not pretend there is not. To accept that deep understanding is rare is to give up a certain hope, the hope that if you just keep meeting enough people, eventually the world will be full of them. It will not be full of them. There will be a few, perhaps a very few, perhaps in a whole life a handful, but the few are enough. It is one of the strange mercies of the human heart that one person who truly knows you can outweigh 1,000 who do not. You do not need the crowd to become your understanders. You need only to recognize the rare ones when they come and to keep the right distance with them so the warmth can last. That is where the whole night is heading, toward the rare warmth kept at the right distance without bitterness at the cold in between. But to get there, we must first go back and meet the man who thought all of this and see how his own difficult, solitary, and finally almost happy life put flesh on these bare ideas. So let the opening close. Let the porcupines settle in the snow at their careful distance. And come with me now to a merchant's house in an old northern city, more than 200 years ago, where a boy was born who would spend his life learning the exact price of getting close. Rest. We go back in time, now, slowly. Chapter 8. Danzig, 1788. Arthur Schopenhauer was born on the 22nd of February in the year 1788 in the old Baltic trading city of Danzig. It is a city of grey water and merchant houses, of ships and ledgers and the cold northern sea, and it left its mark on him. He was a merchant's child before he was anything else, and something of the merchant's clear, unsentimental eye stayed with him for life, even after he turned that eye on the deepest questions there are. His father was Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer, a proud and successful trader, a man of the wider world who admired England and its cool practicality and its liberty. His mother was Johanna, much younger, clever, sociable, restless, a woman who would later become, in her own right, a well-known writer of novels and travel books, more famous in their lifetime than her son. Between these two very different people the boy grew up, and from each he took something that would divide him against himself for the rest of his days. Even the name he was given tells you something: Arthur. His father chose it deliberately because it is spelled and spoken almost the same in German, in English, in French. It was a name built for a life of international trade, a name that would open doors in any counting house in Europe. From his first breath, in other words, Arthur was meant for a certain kind of life. A life of commerce, of business, of the visible world of goods and prices and accounts. His path was chosen before he could speak. It is worth pausing on that, because so many of us know what it is to be handed a life, to be shaped gently or firmly toward the thing our parents needed us to become, long before we had any say in it. There is a particular loneliness in that too, the loneliness of the child who senses, without being able to name it, that the person they are being groomed to be is not quite the person they are. Arthur felt this early. Under the merchant's son, there was another creature entirely, a brooding, watchful, intensely inward child who noticed the sadness of things, who felt the weight of the world more than a boy in a prosperous house had any reason to. When Arthur was 5, in 1793, Danzig lost its independence and was swallowed by the Kingdom of Prussia. His father, who loved liberty and hated to live under that rule, packed up the entire household and moved the family to the free city of Hamburg rather than become a Prussian subject. It was a costly principled uprooting, and it says a great deal about the man. Arthur would spend his childhood in Hamburg, another grey merchant port, another city of water and trade, being quietly readied for the future that had been written for him. But a shadow lay over the house that no prosperity could lift. Arthur's father was subject to fits of melancholy and anxiety that deepened as he aged, a darkness of temperament that his son inherited and never escaped. And his parents, so unalike, were not happy together. The young mother, bright and hungry for society, and the aging father, anxious and severe, made a cold marriage, and the boy grew up inside that coldness, absorbing it, learning very young that the people who are supposed to warm each other often cannot. So here, at the very beginning, are the elements of everything to come. A brilliant, heavy-hearted boy, born into wealth and destined for trade, carrying his father's melancholy in his blood. A home where closeness had failed. A watchful, wounded sensitivity to the sadness under the surface of a comfortable life. He had not yet read a page of philosophy, but he had already begun, without knowing it, to gather the questions that would take him the rest of his life to answer. Let us follow him out of childhood and into the wider world, and to the bargain that would decide his fate. Chapter 9. A father's plan, a son's debt. When Arthur was a boy of about 9, his father did something that shaped him deeply. He sent him away to France, to Le Havre, to live for 2 years with the family of a business associate. There the boy learned French until he spoke it like a native and, more quietly, learned what it is to be a child set down among strangers, far from home, absorbing the world through watchful eyes. He remembered those years fondly, which tells you something about how much warmth there was, or was not, in the house he had left. As Arthur grew into his teens, the great question of his life pressed closer. His father wanted him to be a merchant. Arthur, increasingly, wanted to be a scholar. He was drawn to books, to learning, to the inward life of the mind, and the thought of spending his years in a counting house filled him with a quiet dread. But he loved his father, and he owed him everything, and the pull of that debt was strong. His father, sensing the boy's reluctance, made him an offer, and the offer was a kind of trap, baited with wonder. He said, in effect, "You may choose. You may go to the grammar school and prepare for a life of learning, or you may come with your mother and me on a long journey across Europe and see London and Paris and the Alps and the great cities, and then, when we return, you will enter into business and become a merchant." One path led to books at once. The other led to the world first and the ledger after. Arthur was a teenage boy who had never seen the great cities. He chose the journey. Of course, he chose the journey. And in choosing it, he bound himself to the merchant's life that would follow. It was, he later understood, a bargain in which his father had used the thing Arthur most desired, the wide world, to buy the thing Arthur most dreaded, the counting house. And Arthur, being young, took it. The grand tour lasted the better part of 2 years, through the Low Countries, England, France, Switzerland, Austria. And it did something to him that his father had not intended. Everywhere they went, the boy who already felt the sadness of things saw it confirmed, on a scale he had not imagined. He saw the galley slaves at the port of Toulon, chained to their oars, men who would live and die in irons. He saw poverty and cruelty and the sheer weight of human suffering laid out across a whole continent. And it entered him and never left. Years later, he would say that this journey, taken so young, taught him more than any book. It taught him that the world was not, at bottom, a cheerful or a rational place, that beneath its cities and its commerce ran a deep river of suffering that no one seemed willing to look at directly. He came home from the grand tour with the seed of his entire philosophy already planted, though it would take him 20 years to make it grow. There is something to feel here, quietly, about the way our deepest convictions are so often laid down early, in wordless experiences we did not choose, long before we have the language to understand them. Arthur did not decide on that journey to become the philosopher of suffering. He simply saw and felt, and the seeing and the feeling sank into him and waited. Much of who we become is like that. It waits in us, planted by things we witnessed before we could name them, until one day it rises into thought. Let us follow the seed a little further, through the loss that finally set him free. Chapter 10. The mother who could not love him quietly. When Arthur was 17, his father died. He was found drowned in the canal beside the family warehouse in Hamburg, and though it was never spoken of plainly, Arthur believed, and most who knew the family believed, that the melancholy that had darkened Heinrich's later years had finally taken him by his own hand. The father who had planned his son's whole life was suddenly gone, and the plan went with him. The death broke the family open. Arthur, dutiful and grieving, honored his father's wishes for a while longer and stayed in the merchant apprenticeship he hated. But his mother moved quickly in another direction. Johanna, freed from a marriage that had never warmed her, took her share of the fortune and went to Weimar, the small city that was then the glittering center of German literary life, the city of Goethe. There she opened a salon, became a hostess and a writer, and stepped, at last, into the sociable and brilliant life she had always wanted. And here the wound at the center of Arthur's life comes into full view. He and his mother could not be close, and they could not stay apart. They were, the two of them, porcupines of the sharpest kind. Both were clever, both were proud, both had tongues that could cut. Johanna found her son heavy, gloomy, argumentative, forever dragging the mood of a room down into his dark reflections. Arthur found his mother shallow, vain, too fond of society, insufficiently serious about the sorrow of existence that he felt so keenly. When they were together, they wounded each other. When they were apart, something in each of them still reached for the other, because whatever else was broken, the bond was real. There is a letter she wrote him, or words very close to it, that has survived the centuries, and it is one of the saddest documents in the history of philosophy. She told him, in essence, that his company was a burden she could no longer bear, that his gloom and his disputatiousness made him exhausting to be near, and that it would be better for them to live apart. Eventually they quarrelled so badly that they separated for good. From about his 26th year, Arthur and his mother never saw each other again. She lived on for more than 2 decades. He did not go to her. They corresponded, coolly, at a distance, and that distance, forced on them by the impossibility of being near without wounding, was the exact shape of the porcupine's dilemma, lived out in his own flesh with the person who should have been his first and deepest warmth. You can see now why the parable meant so much to him. He was not theorizing. He had felt, in the most intimate relationship a person has, the whole terrible mechanism. The longing to be close to his mother. The impossibility of being close without the quills coming out on both sides. The retreat to a distance so wide that it became, in the end, a lifelong absence. He had reached for the oldest warmth there is and found only wounds, and he had done what a wounded porcupine does. He had backed away into the cold and stayed there. We should be gentle with both of them tonight, the difficult son and the difficult mother. Neither was a villain. They were 2 people whose inner worlds were too unlike, and whose edges were too sharp to survive close contact, and who could not manage the courtesy, the good distance that might have let a little warmth pass between them without blood. It is one of the most common tragedies there is, this failure between parent and child, and if it is somewhere in your own life, you know that it is not simple, and that blame does not reach the bottom of it. Arthur carried the ache of it always. Let us carry a little tenderness for him, and perhaps for ourselves, as we go on. Chapter 11. The Grand Tour and the First Wound of the World. We touched on the journey through Europe, but I want to return to it, because it holds the emotional root of everything Schopenhauer would later think, and because it is worth sitting with in the quiet. Imagine the boy he was, 15, 16 years old, sheltered, wealthy, intelligent, already inclined to melancholy, but not yet marked by any great sorrow of his own. And then, over many months, the world is opened in front of him, city after city, and it is not the shining world he might have dreamed of. It is the real one. And the real one, seen with an unusually sensitive eye, is full of pain that no one around him seems to notice. He wrote, years afterward, of the galley slaves he saw at Toulon, hundreds of men condemned to row the ships of the state, chained day and night, living out their sentences in a floating hell from which there was no appeal and no escape. He was struck not only by their suffering, but by the ordinariness of it, the way the world simply arranged itself around such misery and went on about its business, buying and selling, as though the chained men were part of the furniture of things. That contrast between the depth of the suffering and the indifference of the world to it lodged in him like a splinter. And it was not only the slaves, it was the beggars, the sick, the poor of the great cities, the visible weight of ordinary human misery that a comfortable life is arranged so carefully not to see. The young Schopenhauer saw it because he had the kind of eye that could not see it, and it changed the color of the world for him permanently. He came to feel that suffering was not an exception in life, not an unfortunate interruption of an essentially happy existence, but something closer to the ground note of the whole thing, the deep tone underneath all the bright surfaces. Later, he would compare the young Buddha's awakening to his own. The story goes that the Buddha, raised in a sheltered palace, went out one day and saw for the first time a sick man, an old man, and a corpse, and that these sights shattered his comfortable illusions and set him on the path to enlightenment. Schopenhauer felt that his grand tour had been his own version of that going out. He had left the palace of his childhood and seen the sickness and the age and the death and the chains that the palace had hidden, and he could never again believe that all was fundamentally well. Now, you might think that a boy so wounded by the suffering of the world would grow into a cruel or a bitter man, or would harden himself against feeling, but something more interesting happened. The seeing of suffering in Schopenhauer did not close his heart. It opened it in one specific direction. It made him, for all his difficulty and his prickliness, a philosopher of compassion, a man who thought that the one thing that could redeem our existence was our capacity to feel another creature's pain as our own. We will come to that in the second half of the night, and it is the warm heart hidden inside all his cold thought. But it began here, on a road across Europe, in a boy who looked at chained men and could not look away. Hold that gently as you lie in the dark. The people who feel the suffering of the world most keenly are not the weak ones. They are often the ones who will one day be most capable of kindness, precisely because they never learned how to stop seeing. If you are one of those people, if the pain of things has always reached you more than it seems to reach others, you are in a long and honorable line. It is a heavy gift, but it is a gift. Rest now. We return to the young man, and to the day he was finally set free to think. Chapter 12. Choosing philosophy over the ledger. For a while after his father's death, Arthur kept his promise. He stayed in the merchant's apprenticeship out of loyalty to the dead man and the guilt that binds a grieving child to a parent's wishes. But he was miserable in it. He would sit in the counting house with a book hidden under the ledgers, stealing minutes of real thought between the columns of figures, living a divided life, the outer one false and the inner one starving. It was his mother, of all people, who finally released him in one of the few genuinely generous acts between them. She saw, or was persuaded, that the boy would never be a merchant, that forcing him into it would waste him, and she gave him leave to abandon the trade and prepare instead for the university. And so, at around the age of 21, Arthur Schopenhauer put down the ledger for good and turned toward the life of the mind that he had wanted since he was a child. It is worth feeling the weight of that turning. He was late by the standards of the time. Other young scholars had been studying Greek and Latin for years, while he was learning the price of coffee and sugar. He had to work furiously to catch up, to master the languages and the learning that a scholar needed. But he did it with a fierce, focused discipline that would mark his whole life. And there was in it a great relief. The relief of a person who has finally been permitted to become what they actually are. He went to university, first at Göttingen, then at Berlin. He began in medicine, studying the natural sciences, the body, the physical world. And this grounding never left him. Unlike many philosophers, Schopenhauer always kept one foot in the concrete facts of nature. But he was drawn irresistibly toward philosophy, toward the deepest questions. And he found there two guides who shaped him more than any others. The first was Plato, with his vision of eternal forms lying behind the changing world of appearances. The second was Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher of the generation just before his, who had argued that we never know the world as it is in itself, but only as it appears to our minds, filtered through the structures of our own perception. From Kant, Schopenhauer took a conviction that would organize everything he thought. There is the world as it appears to us, the world of our experience, the world of objects laid out in space and time and linked by cause and effect. And there is, behind that, the world as it truly is in itself, which we can never directly perceive. The ordinary world, the world of the counting house, the world of things and prices and people, is in a sense a kind of appearance, a representation, a show put on for the mind. And the real thing, the thing behind the show, is something else, something hidden, which it would become his life's work to name. He earned his doctorate with a dense and difficult dissertation on the roots of explanation itself, on the different ways we account for why things are as they are. His mother, ever sharp, mocked its forbidding title and told him it sounded like something for apothecaries. He told her with equal sharpness that his book would be read when not a single copy of hers could be found in a lumber room. As it turned out, he was right, though it would take a very long time and much loneliness before he was proven so. Let us follow him now to the great work of his youth, the book into which he poured everything, and to the silence that met it. Chapter 13. The World as Will and Representation. In his late 20s, settled for a time near Dresden, Arthur Schopenhauer wrote the book that contained his entire philosophy. He wrote it in a state of extraordinary concentration and certainty, convinced that a single great thought had been given to him and that his task was simply to set it down whole. He called it The World as Will and Representation, and it was published at the very end of 1818, though the title page bore the following year. He believed, without false modesty, that he had solved the central riddle of existence. He believed the book was one of the most important ever written, and in a sense, though almost no one would agree with him for decades, he was not wrong about its depth. Everything he wrote afterward, all through his long life, he regarded as merely commentary and expansion upon this one book. The whole of him is in it. The title holds the two halves of his vision, and we will spend later chapters unfolding them gently. So, for now, only the outline. The world as representation is the world as it appears, the world spread out before us as a picture in the mind, full of objects in space and time. This is the world we usually take to be simply real, the world of the ordinary day. But Schopenhauer, following Kant, insisted that this is only the surface, only the show. It is the world as idea, as presentation, as the dream that consciousness casts before itself. And the world as will is what lies behind the show. Here Schopenhauer made his single great and original move. He asked, if the ordinary world is only appearance, is there any way at all to catch a glimpse of the reality behind it? And he answered, yes, there is one. There is one place in all the universe where each of us is not merely on the outside looking at appearances, but on the inside, being the thing itself. And that place is our own body, our own inner life. From the outside, my body is just another object, another representation. But from the inside, I know it as something more. I know it as striving, as wanting, as a restless reaching out that never comes to rest. I know it, in a word, as will. And Schopenhauer's daring leap was to say, this inner reality that I find in myself, this blind striving will, is not mine alone. It is the reality behind everything. The same nameless, restless will that drives me from wanting to wanting is the very same force that drives the animal to hunt, the plant to reach for light, the water to run downhill, the whole roaring machinery of nature to strive and strive and strive without end and without purpose. The inner nature of the world, the thing behind all appearances, is a vast, blind, deathless will to exist and to keep existing, forever unsatisfied. It is a dark vision, and we will feel its darkness fully in the chapters ahead, but also, gently, find the light hidden inside it. For now, hold only the strange grandeur of the idea that behind the calm surface of the world you are lying in tonight, behind the walls and the streets and the sleeping city, there runs one enormous striving, and it runs through you too, and it is the reason you can never quite rest, the reason wanting never ends. He thought he had found the secret at the bottom of things, and he set it down, complete, and sent it out into the world, certain of its glory. The world responded with silence. The book barely sold. It was scarcely reviewed. The great thought he had given his youth to fell into an almost total quiet, and it would stay there, ignored, for most of his life. We turn next to that silence, and to the lecture hall where his pride was broken. But before we do, rest a moment in the thought that some of the truest things ever said were, at first, said to no one. The silence that met his book was not the measure of its worth. It was only the measure of how far ahead of his listeners he had walked. Sleep is welcome here if it comes. If not, come with me to Berlin. Chapter 14. The Lecture Hall against Hegel. A few years after his great book fell into silence, Schopenhauer made one serious attempt to take his place in the world of official philosophy. He obtained the right to lecture at the University of Berlin, and there he made a decision that tells you everything about his pride, his defiance, and his gift for wounding himself. At that time, the reigning star of German philosophy was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was at the height of his fame. His lecture halls were packed, his difficult system was the fashion of the age, and students flocked to him. Schopenhauer despised him. He thought Hegel a charlatan, a spinner of grand empty words, a man who had dressed up confusion in the robes of profundity and been rewarded with a following. And Schopenhauer, certain that his own clear and terrible truth would win out against this fog, did something almost suicidal in its arrogance. He scheduled his own lectures at the very same hour as Hegel's. He was, in effect, inviting the students of Berlin to choose: the famous man or the unknown one, the comfortable system or the hard truth. And the students chose, as students will, the famous man. Almost no one came to Schopenhauer's lectures. He spoke week after week to a nearly empty room, while next door the crowds gathered for Hegel. It was a humiliation so complete that he soon gave up lecturing altogether, and he never held a university post again. He never forgave the academic world for this, and to be fair, the academic world had not exactly courted him. For the rest of his life, he attacked the university philosophers with a savage contempt, calling them hirelings who philosophized for a salary and a career rather than for the truth, men who told comfortable lies, because comfortable lies were what the state and the public wanted to hear. There was bitterness in this, the bitterness of a man who had been ignored. But there was also something clean in it, a refusal to soften his thought in exchange for a place at the table. And here we touch again the theme of the whole night from a new angle. Schopenhauer could not or would not keep the good distance that a career requires. He could not play the courtier, could not flatter, could not join. His quills were always out toward the people who might have helped him. And so he ended up alone, outside the warm rooms of the academy, in the cold of his own uncompromising truth. It cost him decades of recognition. Whether it was worth it is a question he answered in his own life, with a stubborn and lonely yes. There is a lesson here that is neither simple approval nor simple warning. Some people cannot bend themselves into the shape that belonging requires, and for such people the choice is genuinely hard. Bend and be warm and be a little false, or stay straight and be cold and be wholly yourself. Schopenhauer chose to stay straight, and he paid the full price of it in loneliness, and he found only near the end that the truth he had refused to soften was still there, waiting, and that a few people at last had come to stand beside it. But that vindication was decades away. First came the long silence of Frankfurt. Let us go there with him now. Chapter 15. The Silent Decades in Frankfurt. In the year 1831, a cholera epidemic swept through Berlin. Schopenhauer, who valued his life and had a horror of illness and death, fled the city. Among those who did not flee and who died in that epidemic was Hegel himself. There is a grim irony in it that Schopenhauer surely noticed. The famous rival gone, the obscure one preserved, each by the accidents of a plague. Schopenhauer drifted for a couple of years and then, in 1833, settled in the free city of Frankfurt am Main. And there he stayed, in the same city, for the rest of his life. 27 years, nearly 3 decades in one place, living quietly in rented rooms, almost entirely alone, unknown to the wider world, a private gentleman of independent means, who happened to have written one of the strangest and deepest books of the century, a book that almost no one had read. Try to feel the shape of that life. He had money enough, inherited from his father, invested carefully, that he never had to work. He had no wife, no children, no household of his own beyond his rooms and his dog. He had no fame, no students, no circle of admirers for most of those years. He was a man in his 40s, then his 50s, then his 60s, living out a long, quiet, obscure existence in a middling German city, having said, as he believed, the truest thing that could be said about the world, and having been met with silence. And here is the thing that matters most, the thing that turns his story from a tragedy into something stranger and more instructive. He was not, in those decades, a broken or a despairing man. He had made a peace. Having failed at the warm, connected, recognized life, having been unable to keep the good distance that such a life requires, he had turned instead towards solitude, and he had learned to live in it, not as a punishment, but as a home. He built a life of routine, of discipline, of small, reliable pleasures, of the deep companionship of his own mind and his books and his art. And in the middle of his obscurity he went on thinking, went on writing, went on being exactly and fully himself, at the price of being alone. We will look closely, in the second half of the night, at what he learned in those solitary decades, because it is the most useful thing he has to give us. He learned how to be alone without being lonely. He learned to fill the space that other people usually fill with something else, with thought, with beauty, with the ordered rhythm of a well-made day. He is one of the great teachers of solitude, precisely because he had no choice but to master it, and mastered it he did. For now, simply picture him, a stout, sharp-eyed man, past his prime, walking the streets of Frankfurt at the same hour every day, a white poodle at his heel, greeting almost no one, going home to his rooms and his books and his flute, entirely unknown, entirely himself. It looks, from the outside, like a wasted life, a life of failure and isolation. And yet, inside that life, a mind was fully at home, and a peace had been made that most of the warm and connected people rushing past him had never found. There is a lesson in that contrast that we will spend hours drawing out. Rest with the picture a while. The lonely man is not always the unhappy one. Chapter 16. Atma, the company he could keep. Schopenhauer lived almost without human intimacy, but he was not without love, and the object of his love through the long Frankfurt decades was a series of dogs. He kept white poodles, one after another, as each grew old and died and was replaced. And to these animals he gave a tenderness that he could rarely manage toward people. He gave one of them the name Atma, which is a word from the ancient Hindu scriptures he revered, a word meaning the world soul, the innermost self of all things. Think of what it meant for this philosopher of the universal will to call his dog by the name of the soul of the world. It was half a joke and wholly serious. In the simple, present, uncalculating being of the animal, in its freedom from vanity and ambition and the endless human striving after opinion and status, Schopenhauer saw something closer to the truth of existence than most people ever came. The dog did not lie. The dog did not flatter or scheme or wound with words. The dog simply was warm and near, and asked nothing but to be near. There is something to understand here about why the company of an animal can reach a lonely person where the company of other people cannot. The dog has no quills, of the kind that hurt us most. It cannot judge you, cannot betray a confidence, cannot decide you are too gloomy and withdraw its affection, cannot compare you unfavorably to others or grow bored of your inner weather. The warmth it offers comes without the particular sharp edges that make human closeness so dangerous. And so, a person who has been badly wounded in the human huddle can sometimes find, with an animal, a closeness that finally does not hurt, a warmth without the quills. Schopenhauer's routine in Frankfurt was famously fixed, and the dog was woven all through it. He rose and wrote in the morning, when his mind was clearest. He played the flute before his midday meal, this dark philosopher of the world's suffering, filling his rooms with music every single day. He dined out at the same fine establishment, and there is a story that he would place a gold coin on the table at the start of each meal and put it back in his pocket at the end, having wagered with himself that he would part with it. Only on the day the young officers dining nearby spent an entire meal talking of something higher than women, horses, and cards. The coin, the story goes, always went back in his pocket. And in the afternoon he walked for 2 hours, in all weathers, briskly, with the dog, thinking. It is a life we might be tempted to pity, and yet look at what is in it. Work that mattered to him, music every day, good food taken seriously, long walks in the open air, the faithful company of a creature he loved, books in 6 languages, and the deep, unhurried, undistracted engagement of a first-rate mind with the questions it cared about most. Stripped of human warmth almost entirely, he had built a life dense with other warmths, and he lived it with a stubborn, self-contained contentment that is, in its way, quite beautiful. If your own life is short on human closeness right now, whether by circumstance or by temperament or by a wound that has not healed, let Schopenhauer and his poodle be a small comfort in the dark. A life can be made rich by many warmths, not only the one we are taught to think is the only real one. The animal at your feet, the music you make, the walk you take, the work you love, the book that meets your mind, these are not consolation prizes for a failed life. For some people, they are the substance of a good one. Rest now. We come, next, to the strange late morning of his fame. Chapter 17. Late Fame. And the man who was right too early. For most of his life, the world ignored Arthur Schopenhauer. His great book sat unread. His lectures had emptied. He was, to the learned world of his time, a nobody, a private eccentric with strange dark opinions, if he was known at all. And then, in his 60s, near the very end, the strangest thing happened. The world turned around and found him. In 1851, when he was past 60, he published a 2-volume collection of essays and observations on all manner of subjects, written in a clear, sharp, readable prose very different from the dense system of his youth. He gave it a forbidding Greek-derived title, Parerga and Paralipomena, which means, roughly, secondary works and things left over. It was, in a sense, the leftovers of his thought, the shavings from his workshop, and it was these leftovers, not his great masterpiece, that finally made him famous. The essays reached ordinary educated readers as his system never had. People began to read them, and to talk about them, and to seek out the strange old man in Frankfurt who had written them. And through the essays they found their way back to the great book behind them, and slowly, in the last decade of his life, Arthur Schopenhauer became famous. Disciples appeared. Admirers wrote to him and came to visit. His grim philosophy, so out of step with the confident, progressive optimism of his younger years, suddenly matched the mood of a generation that had begun to doubt whether all the progress was really leading anywhere good. He had been right, it turned out. He had just been right too early and had to wait almost his whole life for the world to catch up to him. He enjoyed the fame in his prickly way. After decades of silence, the recognition he had ached for finally came, and he drank it in, collecting the notices, tracking his growing reputation with satisfaction. There is something both touching and a little sad in it, an old man finally receiving, when there was so little life left to enjoy it in, the acknowledgement he had wanted since his youth. The warmth of recognition reached him at last, at the far end of a long, cold road. He died in Frankfurt on the 21st of September, 1860, at the age of 72. He died quietly, at home, one morning, of a failure of the heart, sitting up, alone, his life going out of him without struggle. He had once said that he faced the prospect of his own dissolution with a kind of calm, believing that the individual self that dies is only a passing form of the deathless will behind all things, and that what we are most deeply is not extinguished when the person ends. Whether that belief comforted him at the last, no one can say. He died as he had lived, on his own, self-contained, at the still center of the strange peace he had built. His life is a lesson with more than one edge, and we should not flatten it into a simple moral. It is a warning about the cost of not being able to keep the good distance, the cost in loneliness of quills that will not go down. But it is also a testimony that a life can be deeply solitary and still be a life fully lived, fully thought, fully itself. And it is proof of a stranger and more hopeful thing that being unmet in your own time is not the same as being wrong, that some truths are simply spoken before there are ears ready to hear them, and that the silence which meets you is not always the verdict it seems to be. Now, having walked with the man from his birth to his death, let us turn and look, gently and without fear, at the vision he gave his life to. Let us look at the will behind the world. Chapter 18. The world as idea. Now we turn from the life to the thought, and I want to promise you before we begin that we will go slowly, and that you do not need any training in philosophy to follow. These are among the deepest ideas anyone has ever had, but at their root they are simple enough to hold in a tired mind in the dark, and I will keep them that way. Schopenhauer's philosophy begins with a strange and quietly unsettling claim, one he took from Kant before him and made his own. The claim is this: the world you see around you is not the world as it truly is. It is the world as it appears to you. It is a representation, a picture, a show that your mind puts on for itself. Consider what actually happens when you look at anything. Light strikes your eye. Signals travel to your brain, and your brain constructs out of those signals the experience of a solid, colored, three-dimensional object at a distance from you. The color is not out there in the thing. The color is something your mind makes. The space the object sits in, the time in which it changes, the way one event seems to cause another, all of these, Schopenhauer said, following Kant, are not features of reality in itself. They are the forms of your own perceiving mind, the lens through which you are built to see. Space, time, and causation are, as it were, the shape of the window, not the shape of the world beyond it. This is why he called the ordinary world the world as representation, or the world as idea. It is real enough as experience, but it is experience, a presentation, something that exists only in relation to a perceiving mind. Without an eye to see it, without a mind to lay it out in space and time, the world as we know it would not be there in that form at all. The whole vast, solid-seeming world is, in this sense, a kind of dream, though a lawful and shared and stable dream cast up by consciousness. He was fond of comparing it to a dream and to the ancient Hindu idea of Maya, the veil of appearance that hides the true nature of things. We spend our lives, he thought, taking the veil for the reality, mistaking the show for the substance, chasing after the objects in the dream as though they were the final truth, and they are not. They are the surface. And behind the surface there is something else, something that the surface both expresses and conceals. Now, you might ask, why does this matter for a person lying awake at night with an aching heart? What does it matter whether the world is a representation or not? And the answer is that it changes your relationship to the whole of your experience, gently, at the root. If the world of objects and events, including all your troubles, is in some sense a show cast up by the mind, then you are not simply trapped inside it as one more object among objects. There is a part of you that is the watcher of the show, the awareness in which the whole representation appears. And that watching awareness has a kind of freedom, a kind of distance that the objects in the show do not have. We will build on that quietly through the night, the idea that you are not only a character in the dream, but also, somehow, the space in which the dream is happening, and that this gives you more room than you thought. But first, we must go behind the veil, to the one place where Schopenhauer believed we can touch the reality itself. And that place, strange to say, is inside your own wanting. Rest a moment. Then we go behind the world. Chapter 19. The world as will. If the ordinary world is only a representation, only appearance, then a hard question follows. Is the true reality behind it forever closed to us? Are we sealed forever on the outside of things, able to know only the show and never the substance? Kant had more or less said yes, that the thing in itself, the reality behind appearance, is permanently unknowable. Schopenhauer said no, and this refusal is his single most original and daring idea. He said, "There is exactly one point in all the universe where you are not on the outside looking in. Everywhere else, you meet the world only as representation, only from the outside, as objects appearing to your mind. But there is one object in the world that you also know from the inside. One object that you do not merely perceive, but actually are. And that object is your own body. Look at your own hand. From the outside, it is a representation like any other, a shape in space, a thing you perceive, but you also know your hand in a second, wholly different way from within. When you decide to close it, and it closes, you do not experience that as watching one external event cause another. You experience it as willing, as an inner act of wanting that is the very same thing as the movement seen from inside. Your body, Schopenhauer said, is known to you twice over. From outside, as representation, as a thing among things, and from inside, as will, as striving, as the felt reality of wanting and doing. And this, he argued, is the crack in the wall, the one place where we can reach through the veil of appearance and touch the reality behind it. For here, in my own inner experience, I find that the reality behind the representation of my body is will. Not thought, not reason, but blind wanting, striving, urge. And if the reality behind this one piece of the world, my body, is will, then Schopenhauer made his great leap. The reality behind the whole of the world, behind every appearance, is also will. The same nameless striving I find at the bottom of myself is the thing in itself, the inner nature of everything that is. This is the master key that unlocks his entire vision. The trees straining toward the light, the river forcing its way to the sea, the animal driven to feed and to mate, the crystal forming according to its law, the very force that holds the planets in their courses. All of these, he said, are expressions of one and the same will, the single blind striving that is the reality behind all appearances. Nature is not, at bottom, a great machine, and it is not, at bottom, a great mind. It is a great wanting, a vast and deathless urge to be and to keep being, playing itself out in a million forms, of which you are one. Sit with the strangeness and the grandeur of that for a moment in the dark. The thing that drives you from the inside, the restless wanting that will not let you finally rest, that makes you reach and strive and desire without end, is not just your private psychology. It is the same force that drives the whole of nature. You are a wave of it. When you feel that endless inner pressure of wanting, you are feeling directly the pulse of the reality behind the world. It is an overwhelming thought, and Schopenhauer built his whole philosophy on it, and everything that follows, the darkness and the strange consolation both, flows from this one idea. The world in its heart is will. Rest with that. We will follow the will into its long unhappiness next, and then, patiently, out the other side. Chapter 20. the striving that never ends. If the inner nature of the world is will, blind, endless striving, then a great deal about our lives suddenly makes a dark kind of sense, including the very restlessness that so often keeps us from sleep. Let us follow the thought where it leads, gently, without letting it frighten us, because there is a way through it. The will, Schopenhauer said, is a striving without goal and without end. This is the crucial and terrible point. The will does not want any particular thing, finally. It wants simply to want. It is wanting itself, the bare urge to strive, and so it can never be satisfied, because satisfaction would be its end, and it has no end. Each particular desire, when fulfilled, does not bring the will to rest. It only clears the way for the next desire to arise. The will is like a stream that can never reach the sea, because it is not really trying to reach the sea. It is only trying to keep flowing. You know this from the inside, though you may never have named it so clearly. Think of anything you have ever wanted, badly, and finally gotten. The job, the house, the person, the achievement. There was the long wanting, the striving, the effort. And then there was the moment of getting it, which was sweet for a little while. And then, sooner than you expected, the sweetness faded, and the thing you had fought for became simply the ordinary background of your life, and the wanting, restless as ever, had already moved on to something new. The satisfaction did not last, because satisfaction, in the nature of the will, cannot last. The relief of one fulfilled desire is only the brief pause before the next desire lifts its head. This is why, Schopenhauer thought, no amount of getting can ever finally make us content. We imagine that happiness lies in the fulfillment of our desires, that if we could just satisfy enough of them, we would arrive at last at a lasting peace. But the fulfillment of desire does not lead to lasting peace. It leads only to the next desire. The will is a vessel with no bottom. Pour in as much as you like, of getting, of achieving, of acquiring, and it is never full. We are, each of us, harnessed to a wanting that by its very nature can never be satisfied, and we spend our lives being dragged along behind it, mistaking each new object of desire for the thing that will finally let us rest, and each time we are wrong. Now, this sounds like pure gloom, and Schopenhauer certainly felt its gloom. But notice, quietly, the strange freedom that begins to open inside the dark thought. If the endless dissatisfaction is not your personal failure, if it is simply the nature of the will that runs through all things, then you can stop blaming yourself for it. You are not restless because you have done life wrong. You are restless because you are a form of the restless will, and restlessness is what it is. And more than that, once you see clearly that no getting will ever satisfy the wanting, you are freed a little from the exhausting race to get. If the finish line does not exist, you can stop sprinting toward it. You can, perhaps, step to the side of the endless track and rest, not because you have finally gotten enough, but because you have seen through the whole game. That stepping to the side is where Schopenhauer's philosophy is quietly heading, and it is where we are heading too, over the hours ahead. For now, just let the recognition settle over you like a blanket. The wanting that never rests is not your fault. It is the nature of things. And tonight at least, you do not have to feed it. You can let it run on without you for a while and simply lie here, wanting nothing in the quiet. Rest. The will can wait until morning. Chapter 21. Why satisfaction cannot last. Let us stay a little longer with the strange machinery of desire, because understanding it clearly is the doorway to a great calm, and calm is what we are here for. Schopenhauer noticed that desire in its very structure is a kind of pain. To want something is to feel a lack, an absence, a gap between where you are and where you wish to be. The wanting itself is uncomfortable, a low ache of insufficiency, a sense that things are not yet as they should be. This is easy to miss because we are so used to it. The background hum of wanting is so constant that we take it for the ordinary texture of being awake. But it is, if you attend to it, a kind of low-grade suffering, always there, the felt pressure of the will reaching for what it does not have. And then comes fulfillment, and for a moment, the ache stops. The gap closes. The lack is filled. And this cessation of wanting is what we call satisfaction, or pleasure, or happiness. But notice what Schopenhauer noticed. The pleasure is not a positive thing in its own right. It is only the momentary absence of the pain of wanting. It is the ache stopping, not a new good arriving. Happiness, in this view, is negative. It is the felt relief of a desire ceasing, not a felt presence of something added, which is why it fades so fast. You cannot feel the absence of an ache for very long. Once the wanting stops, the relief of its stopping quickly becomes the new normal. The ache is forgotten, and there is nothing left to feel but the flat quiet before the next desire rises. This is why satisfaction cannot last, and it is one of the deepest and most useful things Schopenhauer ever saw. We keep expecting the fulfillment of our desires to deliver a lasting positive happiness, and it never does. And we keep being surprised, and we keep blaming the particular thing we got, thinking, that was not it, the next thing will be different. But it is not the particular thing that fails us. It is the structure of desire itself. Pleasure is only the pause between wantings, and a pause cannot be a home. Consider a whole life spent on this misunderstanding. A person believes that happiness is somewhere up ahead, in the fulfillment of the next desire, and the next, and the next. They chase, and they get, and the getting goes flat, and they chase again, always convinced that the lasting satisfaction is just one more acquisition away. And they arrive at old age having spent the whole of their days running toward a happiness that, by its very nature, could never arrive, because they had misunderstood what happiness is. They mistook the pauses for the destination and spent their lives sprinting between pauses and called it living. Now hear the mercy in the hard truth, because it is real. If lasting satisfaction is not to be found in getting, then you can lay down tonight the exhausting belief that you must get more in order to be at peace. The peace was never going to come from the getting. And that means the peace does not have to wait for the getting. If happiness is only the stilling of desire, then perhaps the way to it is not to chase the endless satisfaction of desire, but to quiet the desiring itself, to step, even for a while, out of the wanting altogether. And that, it turns out, is something you can do right now, lying here, wanting nothing, needing nothing, letting the whole machinery of striving fall still for one night. This is the door Schopenhauer is opening. Rest in the pause. It is closer to happiness than the getting ever was. Chapter 22. Boredom, the other face of wanting. There is a second half to Schopenhauer's picture of the will, and it is one of his sharpest observations, one that anyone who has ever gotten what they wanted and then felt strangely empty will recognize at once. It concerns boredom. We have said that desire is a kind of pain, the ache of lacking. And we have said that fulfillment brings only a brief relief before the next desire rises. But Schopenhauer saw that sometimes, when a desire is fulfilled and no new desire immediately rises to take its place, we do not feel peace. We feel something else, something almost worse. We feel boredom, the emptiness of having nothing to strive for. And this boredom, he said, is the will feeling its own pointlessness when it has, for the moment, nothing to push against. So we are caught, he thought, between two poles, and this is one of his most famous and bleak images. On the one side, want, the pain of desiring what we do not have, and on the other side, boredom, the emptiness of having no desire to drive us. When we lack, we suffer the pain of wanting, and when we have, and the wanting briefly stops, we suffer the emptiness of boredom. Life swings back and forth between these two, like a pendulum, and true, lasting contentment, the still point between them, is almost impossible to hold for long. This explains something that puzzles people endlessly, which is why those who have everything are so often not happy. We imagine that if we could just secure enough, get comfortable enough, remove enough of the struggle from our lives, we would arrive at peace. But Schopenhauer saw that removing the struggle does not bring peace. It brings boredom. The person who no longer has to strive for anything, who has satisfied every need, discovers that the absence of striving is its own torment, a flat, grey emptiness, and they must then manufacture desires, invent struggles, chase amusements, precisely in order to escape the unbearable boredom of having nothing to want. The rich, the idle, the comfortable spend enormous energy fleeing the boredom that their comfort has produced. You can watch the pendulum in your own days if you look. The stretch of hard wanting, striving toward some goal, tense and unsatisfied. And then the goal reached, and the brief relief. And then, if nothing new arrives to want, the creeping restlessness, the reaching for the phone, the vague dissatisfaction of a mind with nothing to push against. Want on the one side, boredom on the other, and the narrow, hard-to-hold middle, where you are neither aching for something nor empty for lack of something, but simply, quietly content. Schopenhauer thought that middle was terribly hard to reach and hold, and he was right that it is hard. But here is where his diagnosis, dark as it is, becomes practical and even hopeful for a person lying awake. If both the wanting and the boredom come from the same source, the restless will, then the way out is not to swing faster between them, chasing satisfaction to escape boredom, and then fleeing boredom into new satisfaction. The way out is to loosen the grip of the will itself, to learn to rest in the still middle, wanting little, bored by nothing, simply present. And there are ways to do that, ways Schopenhauer pointed to, in beauty, in contemplation, in a certain quieting of the self. We are coming to them. For now, notice that this quiet you are in right now, this late hour with nothing to chase and nothing to flee, is a glimpse of the still middle. You are neither wanting hard nor bored, you are just here. Stay in it. It is rarer and finer than it feels. Chapter 23. The pendulum between pain and emptiness. Let us dwell in that image of the pendulum a while, slowly turning it over, because it is one of those pictures that can quietly change how you carry your whole life. Back and forth, Schopenhauer said, want to boredom, boredom to want. The whole of a human life swinging between the pain of striving and the emptiness of having nothing to strive for. It sounds like a sentence, a condemnation, and in his darker moods, that is how he meant it. But lie with it a little longer, and something softer begins to appear inside it, a kind of permission, a kind of rest. The first gift of the image is that it takes the personal sting out of your own unrest. When you feel the ache of wanting, you can say, "Ah, the pendulum has swung to want. This is the will reaching. This is not a sign that my life is wrong." And when you feel the flat grey of boredom, of nothing-to-do-ness, of a day that has lost its point, you can say, "Ah, the pendulum has swung to boredom. This is the will finding nothing to push against. This too is not a sign that my life is wrong." Both feelings, seen this way, become weather rather than verdicts. They pass across you. They are the swinging of a very old pendulum that swings in everyone, and they are not messages about your particular failure or worth. The second gift is subtler. Once you see the pendulum clearly, you begin to notice the still point at its center, the place the pendulum passes through on its way from one extreme to the other. In the middle of the swing, for an instant, there is a point of stillness, neither wanting nor bored, neither aching for something nor empty for lack of something. And Schopenhauer's deepest counsel, worked out in his ideas about beauty and contemplation and the quieting of the will, is that a human being can learn to rest at that still point far more often than nature intends. Not by stopping the pendulum, which cannot be stopped while we live, but by learning to find and hold the center, to step out of the swing into the quiet middle. Where is the still point found? He thought it was found chiefly in moments when the will falls silent, when for a while you want nothing and lack nothing because your whole attention has been drawn out of yourself into something else. In the deep absorption of looking at something beautiful, in the loss of self that comes with great music, in the quiet of pure contemplation. When you are simply beholding the world without desiring anything from it. In these moments the pendulum stops, the wanting stops, the boredom cannot get in because you are full, and there is only a clear, still, desireless awareness. These are the moments, he thought, when we are briefly released from the tyranny of the will, and they are the closest thing to peace this life allows. And here is the point for tonight. You are near the still center right now. It is late. The day's wanting has largely spent itself. There is nothing you can do at this hour. No goal to strive toward, no task to flee into. The pendulum has slowed. And in this slowing, there is an opening, the same opening Schopenhauer found in beauty and contemplation, the opening into a desireless, restful, present awareness. You do not have to make anything happen. You only have to let the pendulum come to rest at its center and stay there, wanting nothing, lacking nothing, simply here in the dark, held for a while at the still point of the turning world. Rest there. That is where sleep lives. Chapter 24. Reading Other People as Will. Let us bring the great idea of the will back down to the level of the everyday, and specifically back to the problem we began with, the problem of other people and the pain of closeness. Because Schopenhauer's metaphysics is not only a cosmic vision, it is also a strangely practical lens for understanding why human beings treat each other as they do. If every person is, at bottom, a form of the blind striving will, then every person is, at bottom, driven by wanting. Not by reason, though we all flatter ourselves that reason is in charge, by wanting. The will is the master, Schopenhauer said, and the intellect is its servant, useful for finding ways to get what the will already wants, but rarely the true ruler of a human life. When you watch people, and especially when you are hurt by people, it helps enormously to understand that you are watching the will at work, dressed up in 1,000 justifications, but underneath always reaching, always wanting, always driven. This sounds cynical, and in Schopenhauer it often was, but it also has a strange power to soften our resentments. When someone treats you badly, coldly, selfishly, the ordinary response is to take it personally, to feel that they have singled you out, that there is a special malice aimed at you. But if you understand that they are being driven, as all of us are, by a blind will that is mostly concerned with its own striving, you can see their behavior less as a personal attack and more as the ordinary operation of the will in a creature who has not learned to master it. They are not usually being cruel to you. They are simply being driven by wants and fears and urges they barely understand themselves, and you happened to be in the path. This is not an excuse for cruelty, and Schopenhauer did not mean it as one, but it is a way of not being destroyed by it. The person who cut you off, who let you down, who could not give you the warmth you needed, was, in most cases, not a monster aiming at your ruin. They were a bundle of will, striving after their own needs, blind to yours, doing what the will does in a creature who has not risen above it. Seen that way, their coldness stops being a message about your worth and becomes just the weather of the will, impersonal, almost natural, like the porcupine's quills going out, not from malice, but from the simple fact of being a quilled creature in the cold. And it works the other way too, more uncomfortably. You are also at bottom a form of the striving will. When you have hurt others, withdrawn from them, failed to give the warmth they needed, that too was mostly the will at work in you, driven by wants and fears you barely saw. This is not meant to excuse you either, but to level the ground. We are all in the same condition, all driven by the same blind striving, all wounding each other. Not usually out of special wickedness, but out of the ordinary blindness of creatures ruled by a will they did not choose and cannot easily master. To see this is to become slowly more forgiving of others and of yourself, because you see that the wounding is built into the situation, into the very nature of what we are, and that rising above it into genuine kindness is a rare and difficult achievement rather than a default anyone should have managed. Hold that as you lie here. The people who have hurt you were mostly not aiming at you. They were being driven, as you have been driven. There is a great softening available in that thought, a laying down of the sharpest resentments, and softening is a good companion for sleep. We turn next to why some of us feel all of this so much more than others. Rest first, chapter 25. Why the deep feel more of everything. Schopenhauer believed that people differ enormously in the depth and intensity of their inner lives, and that this difference explains a great deal about who suffers, who is lonely, and who is capable of the highest kinds of experience. It is worth spending a chapter here gently, because if you are the kind of person who lies awake thinking, this is, in a sense, about you. He thought that a richer, finer, more powerful mind experiences everything more intensely. It feels pleasure more keenly, yes, but it also feels pain more keenly, sees more, understands more, and is therefore exposed to more of the sorrow of existence than a duller mind is. The person of great sensitivity is like a finely tuned instrument that resonates to sounds a coarser instrument would not even register. This is a gift, because it opens the whole depth of beauty and meaning and understanding. But it is also a burden, because the same sensitivity that opens you to depth opens you to suffering, and there is no way to have the one without the other. You cannot feel deeply in only the pleasant direction. And this depth, he thought, is precisely what makes such people lonely. We touched on this at the start of the night, and now we can see its root. The person of unusual inner depth lives in a richer, more complicated inner world than most of the people around them, and there are simply fewer minds capable of meeting them there. The deeper your inner life, the rarer the company that can truly reach it, and so the more alone you are likely to feel, not because you are unlovable, but because you are unusual, and the unusual is by definition less often matched. The shallow have many companions, the deep have few. This is not a punishment. It is arithmetic, again, the plain mathematics of rarity. But Schopenhauer drew from this a conclusion that is, in the end, consoling, and it is one of the most important things he can give to a sensitive person who has spent a life feeling out of step. He said that the person of great inner depth carries within themselves the very thing that others go out into the crowd to find. The reason most people cannot bear to be alone is that their inner resources are thin, and so, left alone, they face an emptiness they cannot fill, and they flee to company to escape it. But the person of rich inner life is not empty when alone. They have, within their own mind, a whole world of thought, of imagination, of memory, of understanding, of the capacity for wonder and contemplation. And so, solitude, which is a torment to the empty, is a refuge and even a delight to the full. This is the great turn, the hinge on which the whole second half of the night swings. The very depth that makes you lonely is the same depth that makes solitude possible, even rich. The sensitivity that costs you easy company is the same sensitivity that lets you keep company with yourself. If you have always felt slightly apart, slightly too much, slightly unable to be satisfied by the shallow warmth that satisfies others, Schopenhauer would tell you that this is not a defect to be fixed, but a condition to be understood, and that it comes with its own compensation, hidden and easy to miss. You are lonelier, yes, but you are also more able to be alone. And in a life where deep company is rare, the ability to be your own good company is worth more than gold. That is where we now turn for the rest of the night. Away from the difficulty and toward the gift. Away from the loneliness and toward the solitude that is its quiet twin. Rest now and let us go together into the refuge. Chapter 26. Solitude is not loneliness. Here is the distinction on which everything now depends, and it is one of the most important distinctions a person can ever learn to feel. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. They can look identical from the outside. A person alone in a room is a person alone in a room. But on the inside, they are almost opposites, and learning to tell them apart and to move from one to the other is one of the quiet arts of a good life. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted aloneness. It is being alone and aching not to be, feeling the absence of others as a wound, a lack, a cold. Loneliness is the porcupine out in the snow, longing for the warmth of the huddle and unable to reach it. It is aloneness experienced as deprivation, as exile, as something missing. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is aloneness experienced not as lack but as space. It is being alone and finding in it not deprivation but freedom, not cold but a certain clean and open air. In solitude, you are not aching for others. You are, instead, at home with yourself, filling the aloneness with your own presence, your own thought, your own quiet company. The same physical fact, one person alone, becomes, in solitude, not a wound, but a kind of wealth. Schopenhauer was a great teacher of solitude because he had been forced to become one. Denied easy human warmth by his temperament and his circumstances, he had to learn to make aloneness livable, and he discovered, in the learning, that aloneness could be far more than livable. It could be the very ground of the richest life, the condition under which the mind is most free, most itself, most able to think and to see and to create. He came to prize his solitude, to guard it, to consider it one of the chief goods of his existence, and he wrote in his late essays some of the wisest words ever written about the value of being alone. The move from loneliness to solitude is not a move in your circumstances, it is a move in your relationship to your own aloneness. The same evening alone can be loneliness or solitude depending on what you bring to it. If you sit in it aching for the company you do not have, resenting the aloneness, fleeing from your own presence toward the phone and the noise and the distraction, it is loneliness and it hurts. But if you settle into it, turn toward your own inner life, let the aloneness become a spaciousness rather than a lack, fill it with thought or beauty or simple restful presence, it becomes solitude, and it can be one of the sweetest things there is. This is not a trick, and it is not always easy, and there are kinds of loneliness so deep, born of real loss or real deprivation, that no reframing can simply dissolve them. We must be honest about that. But for the ordinary, chronic, temperamental loneliness of a sensitive person in a world that does not often meet them, the move towards solitude is real and available, and it changes everything. It turns the thing you dreaded, being alone, into the thing that sets you free. Tonight, lying here in the dark, alone with the quiet, you are being offered the choice. Gently, without pressure. You can lie here in loneliness, aching for what is not here. Or you can let this aloneness become solitude, a clean and open space that is entirely yours, in which you rest, at home with yourself, needing no one, lacking nothing, held by the simple sufficiency of your own presence. The circumstances are the same either way. Only the meaning changes. And the meaning is yours to give. Rest into the solitude. It was always more spacious than the loneliness. We will learn its freedoms one by one through the hours ahead. Chapter 27. The freedom of being unobserved. One of the first and simplest gifts of solitude, the one you can feel most immediately, is the freedom of being unobserved. And it is worth dwelling on, because most of us do not realize how much of our daily suffering comes from the sheer strain of being watched. Think for a moment of how much of your day is spent under the eyes of others, real or imagined, managing how you appear, adjusting your face, your voice, your words to the people around you, anticipating their judgments, guarding against their disapproval, arranging yourself into the shape you think you are supposed to have. Even alone, we often carry the imagined eyes of others with us, rehearsing conversations, worrying over how we came across, bracing against criticism that is not even happening. The self we present to the world is a construction, held up by constant effort, and the effort is exhausting, all the more so because it is so constant that we stop noticing it, the way you stop noticing a weight you have carried all day. Schopenhauer understood that other people are, among other things, a tribunal. To be among them is to be judged, ranked, compared, measured, and to feel, always, the pressure of their opinion. And he thought that most people are far too much at the mercy of that opinion, that they sacrifice their peace, their freedom, even their integrity, to the endless anxious management of what others think of them. So much of human misery, he saw, comes not from real hardship, but from vanity, from the wound of being thought less of, from the exhausting labor of maintaining a reputation and a face. And solitude is the release from all of it. When you are truly alone, the tribunal is dismissed. There is no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to guard against, no appearance to maintain. You can let the constructed self fall away and simply be, without arrangement, without effort, in the clean relief of being unobserved. The face can go slack. The performance can stop. You can think your real thoughts, feel your real feelings, be your actual unedited self, because there is no audience to shape yourself for. This is one of the deepest reliefs there is, and most people fleeing solitude never let themselves feel it. Notice this freedom in yourself, right now, in the dark. No one is watching you. No one is judging how you lie, how you look, what crosses your face, what passes through your mind. You have set down for these hours the whole heavy apparatus of being seen. You do not have to be anything for anyone. You do not have to hold your face a certain way or arrange your thoughts for approval. You can simply be unobserved, unjudged, unmeasured in the private dark where no tribunal reaches. Feel how much lighter that is. Feel the weight of 1,000 imagined eyes lifting off you. This is why solitude, which the lonely dread, is treasured by those who have learned its worth. It is the one place where the exhausting work of being a self for others can finally stop. It is where you are returned to yourself, whole and unwatched and free. Schopenhauer guarded his solitude fiercely because he knew this, knew that in it he was released from the tribunal and restored to himself, and that this restoration was worth more than all the warmth of company purchased at the price of endless self-management. Rest in your unobservedness. No one is watching. You are free. Let the constructed self dissolve into the dark and be, for a while, simply and only yourself. Chapter 28. On the wisdom of keeping some distance. In his late essays, the ones that finally made him famous, Schopenhauer wrote a good deal of practical wisdom about how to live, and much of it circles back to the porcupine and its careful distance. He had become, by then, an old man who had learned through long solitude how to hold himself in relation to other people, and his counsel is worth hearing, gently, as the advice of someone who paid dearly for what he knew. His central practical teaching about other people was this: keep some distance. Do not fling yourself into closeness without reserve. Do not press quill to quill in the hope of perfect warmth, because that way lies the endless wounding we began the night with. Instead, learn the wisdom of the moderate distance, the courtesy, the reserve, that lets you share warmth with others without constantly injuring and being injured. He thought that a certain measured coolness, a holding back of the last degree of intimacy, was not a failure of connection, but the very thing that makes durable connection possible. This can sound sad, and in Schopenhauer it sometimes was, the counsel of a man who had given up on the deepest closeness. But there is a truer and gentler reading of it, and I think it is the right one. He is not saying, do not love. He is saying, do not demand of any closeness more than it can bear. Do not lean the whole weight of your need on another person, because no person can hold the whole weight of another's need without both of them being crushed. Keep enough of yourself in your own keeping, enough of your peace grounded in your own solitude, that you do not arrive at every relationship starving, demanding that the other person fill an emptiness that only you can tend. This is, in a way, the secret of not wounding and not being wounded so much. The person who has learned to be content in their own solitude comes to others not as a starving creature desperate for warmth, quills flailing, but as someone already substantially warm, who brings warmth rather than only seeking it. Their closeness is lighter, because it is not a matter of survival. They can be near without clinging, can share without demanding, can love without devouring, precisely because they are not relying on the other person to save them from an unbearable aloneness. Their solitude has made their company safe. There is a paradox here worth resting in. The better you become at being alone, the better you become at being with others. The person who cannot bear solitude brings to every relationship a desperate neediness that eventually exhausts and wounds, because they are asking another human being to be their entire refuge from the emptiness. But the person who has made peace with solitude, who can be alone without aching, brings to relationships a fullness rather than a hunger, and their closeness is a gift rather than a demand. Solitude, mastered, is the ground of better love, not its enemy. So the distance Schopenhauer counsels is not coldness toward others, it is warmth toward yourself. A warmth so steady that you no longer need to wring survival out of every closeness. From that ground, you can keep the porcupine's wise distance, close enough to share real warmth, far enough that the quills do not have to come out, and you can hold that distance not out of fear, but out of a settled sufficiency. This is the distance of the person who has learned to be at home in their own solitude, and it is the distance at which love at last stops wounding. Rest here. We go deeper into the riches of that solitude next. Chapter 29. The company of your own mind. We have said that the person of rich inner life is not empty when alone, that they carry within themselves a whole world. Let us dwell on that world tonight, because it is the true wealth of solitude, and most people never learn how much is in it. What is actually there in the company of your own mind when the noise of others falls away? A great deal, if you let yourself find it. There is memory, the vast accumulated country of everything you have lived, which you can wander through at will, revisiting places and faces and moments, seeing them anew with the understanding that time has given you. There is imagination, which can build whole worlds, follow thoughts wherever they lead, play with ideas and possibilities that have no home in the practical world. There is understanding, the slow, deepening comprehension of your own life and of the nature of things, which needs solitude to ripen because it cannot grow in the constant chatter of company. There is the capacity for wonder, for being struck by the strangeness and beauty of existence, which visits most easily in quiet. And there is, underneath all of these, simple awareness itself, the clear, open space of consciousness in which everything appears. Schopenhauer spent his solitary decades in the constant company of this inner world, and he found it inexhaustible. He read voraciously in many languages, and reading is a way of filling solitude with the finest minds of all the ages, of keeping company with the greatest human beings who ever lived, at whatever hour you choose, without any of the friction of their actual presence. He thought deeply and continuously, and thinking is a companionship with the truth itself, a slow, patient conversation with reality that only solitude makes possible. And he attended to beauty in nature, in art, in music. And beauty is a kind of communion that asks for no one else. The tragedy, he thought, is that most people never develop this inner world, and so, when they are alone, they find nothing there, only a frightening emptiness, and they flee. They have spent their lives on the outer world, on getting and doing and being seen, and have left the inner world untended, a bare and empty room. And so solitude, which could have been their richest possession, becomes only a void they cannot bear. The remedy is not more company. The remedy is to cultivate the inner world, to furnish the inner room, so that when you are alone with something, with a whole rich country of mind rather than with nothing. And here is a quiet encouragement for you if you are the kind of person who lies awake thinking. That very thinking, which can feel like a curse, which keeps you from the easy sleep of simpler minds, is the sign of an inner world already rich, already furnished, already full. The overactive mind at night is the same mind that can keep you deep company in solitude. It only needs to be turned gently, from anxious churning toward restful richness, from the loneliness of thoughts you are fighting toward the solitude of thoughts you are simply keeping company with. The instrument is already fine, it only needs to learn to play softly. So tonight, do not fight the company of your own mind. Do not experience your inwardness as a torment to be escaped. Let it be, instead, the rich and spacious country it truly is. Wonder in its memory, rest in its awareness, let its quiet wonder rise. You are not alone in the dark. You are in the company of the deepest and most faithful companion you will ever have. The one who has been with you since the beginning and will be with you to the end, your own inner world. Keep it gently tonight and let it keep you. Rest. Chapter 30. What boredom teaches the undistracted. We spoke earlier of boredom as one pole of the will's pendulum, the emptiness that comes when we have nothing to strive for. But there is more to say about boredom, something gentler and more useful, that Schopenhauer's love of solitude opens up. For boredom, faced rather than fled, has something to teach. Most people, most of the time, are running from boredom. The moment a gap opens in the day, a moment with nothing to do, nothing to want, nothing to occupy the surface of the mind, they reach immediately for something to fill it. A screen, a task, a snack, a conversation, anything to keep the emptiness at bay. Our whole modern world is arranged, in a way, as an enormous machine for the prevention of boredom, an endless supply of distraction so that no one ever has to sit in the bare quiet of an unfilled moment. And we have come to believe that this is good, that boredom is a problem to be solved, an enemy to be defeated by constant stimulation. But Schopenhauer and the long tradition of contemplatives he admired saw something different. Boredom, faced rather than fled, is the doorway to depth. The emptiness we run from is the same emptiness in which the deeper things can finally be heard. When you stop filling every gap, when you let the boredom come and do not flee it, something happens on the other side of it. The surface restlessness, deprived of its distractions, eventually settles. And beneath the boredom, if you can stay with it long enough, you find not a void, but a depth, a quiet, a spaciousness, the very stillness at the center of the pendulum that we spoke of before. Boredom is often just the front door of stillness, and we flee it precisely at the threshold, one step before it would have opened into peace. This is why the capacity to be bored without fleeing is a kind of strength, even a kind of freedom. The person who cannot bear a moment of boredom is a person perpetually enslaved to distraction, unable ever to reach the depths that only unfilled quiet can open. But the person who can sit in the empty moment, who can let boredom come and pass without immediately smothering it, gains access to something the perpetually distracted never reach. They gain the ability to be alone with the bare fact of existence without needing it to be entertaining, and in that bareness they find a peace that no entertainment could ever give. Solitude teaches this, because in solitude the distractions run out and you are left eventually with the bare quiet, and you must either flee it or learn to rest in it. Schopenhauer, in his long solitary decades, learned to rest in it, and found that on the far side of boredom lay some of the deepest contentment of his life, the still, desireless, undistracted presence that he considered the closest thing to happiness this world allows. Tonight, you are in a moment with nothing to fill it, and that is exactly as it should be. Do not reach for distraction. Do not flee the bare quiet of the hour. Let whatever restlessness there is come, and let it pass, and let yourself sink through it, past the surface boredom, into the depth beneath, the still, spacious, undistracted quiet that has been waiting there all along. One step past the emptiness you were tempted to flee. That depth is where rest lives. Let the boredom be the door. Walk through it into the stillness. Sleep is on the other side. Chapter 31. The narrow middle between pain and boredom. Let us return one more time to the still center of the pendulum, the narrow middle between the pain of wanting and the emptiness of boredom. because it is the place all of Schopenhauer's practical wisdom is trying to help us reach, and because it is exactly the place a person needs to find in order to sleep. He was honest that this middle is hard to hold. The will is always pulling us off it into fresh wanting or into restless boredom, and the natural swing of a human life passes through the still center only for instants before the pendulum carries us on. But he believed, and the contemplative traditions he loved confirmed, that a human being can learn to widen and lengthen those instants, can learn to rest at the center far more than nature intends, can make of the still middle not a fleeting passage, but something closer to a dwelling. How? Not by force, for the will cannot be conquered by the will. You cannot strive your way into the stillness that is the absence of striving. That is the paradox at the heart of it. Every effort to grab the peace is itself a form of the wanting that destroys the peace. The still center is not reached by trying harder. It is reached by letting go, by ceasing to grasp, by allowing the wanting and the boredom both to fall away of their own accord when they are no longer fed. It is less a doing than an undoing, less an achievement than a surrender. And the conditions that most favor this surrender are exactly the conditions of a quiet night. In the day, the will is fed constantly by tasks, by goals, by the endless small wants and frictions of active life. And the pendulum swings hard. But at night, when the day is done and there is nothing to strive for and nothing to flee into, the will is starved of its fuel. The wanting has nothing to reach for. The boredom has nothing it needs to be filled with, because there is nothing you are supposed to be doing. And in that starvation of the will, the pendulum naturally slows, and the still center naturally opens. And a person who does not fight it, who does not reach for a new want or flee a rising boredom, simply comes to rest at the middle, wanting nothing, lacking nothing, present and quiet and free. This is what sleep actually requires when you think about it. Sleep cannot be striven for. The harder you try to fall asleep, the more the trying keeps you awake, because the trying is itself a form of the wanting that sleep requires you to lay down. Sleep comes only when you stop reaching for it, when you let the will fall still, when you cease to want even sleep and simply rest in the quiet with no demand at all. Falling asleep is, in a way, a small nightly lesson in exactly the surrender Schopenhauer spent his life pointing toward. The letting go of the will into the still center where peace and rest and finally unconsciousness are allowed to come. So do not strive tonight for anything, not even for sleep. Let the wanting fall still. Let the boredom, if it comes, pass through without being fed. Let the pendulum slow of its own accord, and let yourself come to rest at the narrow middle, wanting nothing, needing nothing, reaching for nothing, not even for rest. Just be here, at the still center, in the quiet, and let whatever comes, come. That is the whole art of it. That is where the peace has been all along. Rest into the middle. It is wide enough to sleep in. Chapter 32. Why the best company is rare, and that is all right. Let us come back now to other people. but from the far side of solitude, with all we have learned about being alone. Because Schopenhauer was not, in the end, a hater of human connection. He was a realist about it, and his realism, once you accept it, is oddly freeing. He believed that truly good company, the company of a mind that can actually meet yours at depth, is rare, and that most of the company available to us is not of that kind. Most social life, he thought, is shallow, driven by the flight from solitude rather than by any real meeting of souls, and to expect deep nourishment from it is to be perpetually disappointed. He counselled, therefore, a certain lowering of expectations about ordinary company, not out of contempt, but out of accuracy. Enjoy the shallow warmth for what it is, a mild and pleasant thing, and do not ask it to be the deep thing because it cannot be, and asking will only sour it. But he did believe in the rare, deep company, and he prized it all the more for its rarity. The occasional mind that could truly meet his, in a book, in a letter, in a conversation with one of the few he respected, was precious to him precisely because it was so uncommon. And this is the balanced wisdom we can take from him, holding both halves at once. Deep connection is real and worth everything, and also rare and not to be expected often. The mistake is to demand depth from every relationship and be constantly wounded by its absence, or to give up on depth entirely and sink into cynicism. The wisdom is to hold the door open for the rare deep meeting while making your peace through solitude with its ordinary absence. And here is the crucial thing, the thing that makes this bearable rather than bleak. If you have learned to be at home in solitude, then the rarity of deep company stops being a tragedy. When you can keep yourself good company, when your aloneness is solitude and not loneliness, then you no longer need the deep connection in order to survive. You would welcome it, treasure it, be nourished by it if it comes, but you are not starving for it, not dependent on it, not destroyed by its absence. And so you can wait for it without desperation, recognize it when it comes without clutching, and lose it, if you must, without collapse. Your solitude has made you free in relation to the rare deep company, able to receive it as a gift rather than to demand it as a need. This is, in a way, the reconciliation of the whole night, the bringing together of the two halves. We began with the pain of closeness, the quills, the wounding, the loneliness even in the crowd. And we have travelled through Schopenhauer's hard-won wisdom to a place where solitude has become a home, where you can be alone without aching, and where, from that ground of self-sufficiency, you can approach others without the desperate neediness that made closeness so dangerous. The porcupine that has learned to keep itself warm does not have to fling itself against the others and be wounded. It can share the huddle lightly, at the wise distance, taking what warmth is offered without demanding survival from it, and it can return unwounded to its own good solitude whenever it wishes. That is the freedom Schopenhauer found at the far end of his long and lonely life. Not the freedom of never needing anyone, which is a kind of death, but the freedom of not needing them desperately, which is a kind of peace. From that peace, the rare deep company, when it comes, is pure gift, and its rarity is no longer a wound. Rest in that reconciliation tonight. You do not need the crowd. You do not need to be desperately close to anyone. And from that quiet sufficiency, when real warmth comes, you will be able to receive it at last without wounding and without being wounded. We turn now to the deepest of solitude's gifts, the escape into beauty. Rest first. Chapter 33. The escape hatch of beauty. We have spoken of the will, the endless striving that never rests, and of the pendulum between wanting and boredom, and of the still center that is so hard to reach because every effort to reach it is itself a form of wanting. And now we come to Schopenhauer's great and beautiful answer to the question of how, then, we ever escape the will at all. His answer, and it is one of the loveliest things in all of philosophy, is beauty. When you look at something beautiful, truly look and are truly caught by it, something remarkable happens to the ordinary machinery of wanting. For a moment, you stop wanting anything from the thing you are looking at. You do not want to use it, possess it, consume it, get anything out of it. You simply behold it, lost in the pure seeing of it, absorbed still. And in that moment of pure absorbed beholding, Schopenhauer said, the will falls silent. The endless striving stops. You are, for that moment, released from the whole exhausting apparatus of desire, lifted out of the pendulum, set down in a clear and desireless peace. This is what the experience of beauty really is, in his account. It is not just pleasure, it is liberation. It is one of the very few doorways out of the prison of the will, a moment when the wanting self dissolves and there is only pure contemplation, the clear beholding of something for its own sake, with nothing wanted and nothing lacked. When you stand before a great painting and forget yourself, when a landscape stops you in your tracks and empties your mind of everything but the sight of it, when you are caught by the beauty of a face or a tree or the light on water and simply gaze, wanting nothing, you are experiencing the will at rest, the striving stilled, the pendulum stopped. You are, for a moment, free. And notice what makes it possible. It is the forgetting of yourself. In ordinary experience, you stand at the center of everything, wanting, needing, relating every object to your own striving. But in the experience of beauty, the self falls away, the wanting self, the center of need, and there is only the object, purely beheld, and the pure awareness beholding it. You become, Schopenhauer said, a clear eye of the world, a pure, will-less subject of knowing, no longer a striving individual but simply awareness itself, contemplating. The loss of the wanting self is the whole secret of the peace. When you forget yourself in beauty, you have, for that moment, escaped the very thing that makes life a striving and a suffering, which is the wanting self at the center of it all. This is why beauty matters so much more than we usually think. It is not a decoration on life, a pleasant extra. It is one of the few genuine escape hatches from the prison of endless wanting, a reliable doorway into the still center available to anyone who can learn to truly look. And solitude, again, is its great friend, because beauty is best beheld in quiet, without the chatter and the friction of company pulling you back into your striving social self. Alone, still, attentive, you can give yourself wholly to the beautiful thing and be wholly released. Tonight, in the dark, there may be no painting to gaze at, no landscape, no light on water. But there is the quiet itself, which has its own beauty, and there is the vast dark and the softness of rest, and the strange beauty of simply being, of existing at all, which you can behold if you turn toward it gently. Let yourself be caught for a moment by the sheer quiet strangeness of being here. Awareness resting in the dark, wanting nothing. Let the wanting self dissolve into the pure being here. That dissolving is beauty's gift, and it is also very nearly the gift of sleep. Rest into it. We turn next to the deepest of all beauty's forms, which Schopenhauer loved above all others. Music. Chapter 34. Music, the voice of the will itself. Of all the arts, Schopenhauer loved music the most, and he gave it a place in his philosophy higher than any other art, higher than painting or poetry or sculpture. And his account of why music moves us so deeply is one of the most beautiful and mysterious ideas he ever had, and a fitting thing to rest with in the deep quiet of the night. The other arts, he thought, show us the forms of the world, the shapes and ideas that the will takes on as it expresses itself in things. A painting shows us the idea of a landscape, a face, a scene. It works at the level of appearance, of representation, showing us the world's forms made beautiful and clear. But music, he said, does something different and deeper. Music does not show us the forms the will takes. Music is a direct voice of the will itself. It speaks not of this or that thing in the world, but of the inner reality behind all things, the striving, the longing, the movement, the rising and falling and resolving that is the very life of the will at the heart of existence. This is why music can move us so profoundly without being about anything at all. A melody depicts no object, tells no story, points to nothing in the world, and yet it can reach into us and stir the very depths of our feeling, can bring us to tears or to a strange, soaring joy, can express the inexpressible movements of the soul more directly than any words. And the reason, Schopenhauer thought, is that music bypasses the whole world of appearances and speaks straight to and from the will itself, the inner reality that we all are. When we listen to music, we are hearing, in a form we can bear, the very striving and longing and resolving of the will that is our own innermost nature. Music is the will made audible, the heart of the world singing itself. And here is the strange consolation in it, and why music of all things can soothe a restless soul at night. In ordinary life, the will drives us, and its striving is suffering, the endless, painful reaching we have spoken of all night. But in music, that same striving is transformed. The longing becomes beautiful. The endless reaching, which in life is torment, becomes, in a melody, something that rises and falls and resolves, something we can contemplate and be moved by rather than driven by. Music takes the very thing that makes life a suffering the restless striving of the will, and holds it up before us transfigured, made beautiful, made bearable, even made a source of the deepest joy. It lets us experience the will not as our tormentor, but as something we can behold from a little distance with wonder. This is why music can reach us where nothing else can, and why it has always been the companion of the sleepless and the sorrowful, the thing people turn to in the dark when words have failed. In music, the ache at the center of us finds a voice, and hearing it voiced, we are somehow comforted, as though the loneliness of our striving were shared at last, met and answered by the great striving of the world-made song. We are less alone in our longing, because the longing itself has been sung, and in the singing made beautiful, and in the beauty made bearable. Perhaps tonight there is soft music playing near you, or perhaps only the quiet, which has its own music, the low music of the night itself, the hum of the dark. Either way, let yourself listen the way Schopenhauer listened, not for information, not for meaning you can put in words, but for the direct voice of the deep thing that you are, the striving and longing at your own center, held up and made beautiful and made bearable. Let the ache in you be voiced and answered by the quiet. Let your own restless will be transfigured for a while into something you can simply listen to and be soothed by rather than driven by. That transfiguration is music's deepest gift, and it is very close to the gift of sleep, the moment when the striving stops driving you and becomes instead a soft song carrying you down into the dark. Rest now and listen. We turn next to the moment of forgetting the self entirely. Chapter 35. The moment you forget yourself. We have circled several times now around a single quiet idea, and it is time to name it plainly and rest in it, because it is the golden thread running through all of Schopenhauer's paths to peace. The idea is this: the deepest suffering comes from the wanting self at the center of everything, and the deepest peace comes when that self is, for a while, forgotten. Think back over the moments of real peace you have known in your life. Not the pleasures of getting what you wanted, which faded, but the moments of genuine stillness, of being lifted out of yourself. They were almost always moments when you forgot yourself. When you were so absorbed in something, a piece of music, a landscape, a piece of work you loved, a face you were gazing at, that the anxious, wanting, self-conscious self simply dropped away, and there was only the thing and the pure awareness of it. In those moments, you were not thinking about yourself at all, not worrying, not wanting, not managing your image or your future or your fears. You had forgotten the self, and in forgetting it, you were at peace. This is the great paradox that Schopenhauer understood and that all the contemplative traditions understood before him. The self that we spend our whole lives serving, protecting, promoting, worrying over, is the very source of most of our suffering. It is the wanting self, the striving self, the self at the center of the will, and as long as we are locked inside it, we are locked inside its endless dissatisfaction. And the moments of deepest peace are precisely the moments when this self is transcended, forgotten, dissolved, when we are lifted out of our anxious individual striving into something wider, a pure contemplation, a pure awareness, in which the wanting self is simply not there. Beauty does this, as we have seen. Great music does this. Deep absorption in meaningful work does this. And so, in its highest form, does compassion, which we will come to next. For in true compassion, the wall between self and other dissolves, and you are lifted out of your own narrow striving into a wider identification with another's being. All the paths out of suffering that Schopenhauer pointed toward are, in the end, the same path. The forgetting of the wanting self, the dissolving of the anxious individual center, the escape from the narrow me into something wider and stiller and freer. And here is the tender application for the sleepless hour. Much of what keeps us awake at night is the wanting self, churning, worrying over its future, replaying its wounds, managing its fears, wanting things to be other than they are. The self, awake and anxious, keeping itself awake with its own endless concern for itself. And the way towards sleep is very nearly the way Schopenhauer pointed toward peace, which is the gentle forgetting of that self, not fighting it, not managing it, which only feeds it, but letting it gradually be forgotten. Letting the anxious center soften and dissolve. Letting there be, for a while, no one who needs anything, no self to worry over, only awareness, resting in the dark, wanting nothing, forgetting even itself. Sleep, after all, is the nightly forgetting of the self. Every night, if we are lucky, the wanting self dissolves, the anxious individual center lets go, and there is a passage into a deep unconsciousness where the striving stops entirely. Falling asleep is a small daily rehearsal for the great letting go that Schopenhauer spent his life pointing toward, the release from the self and its endless wanting. So tonight, let yourself forget yourself. Let the anxious center soften. Let there be no one who needs to solve anything, protect anything, want anything. Only the quiet and the dark and awareness gently dissolving into rest. The forgetting of the self is not a loss. It is the deepest peace there is. Sink into it now. We turn next to the one bridge between selves that Schopenhauer thought could actually hold: rest. Chapter 36. Compassion, the only bridge that holds. We have spent much of the night on the difficulty of closeness, the quills, the wounding, the impossibility of pressing two selves together without pain. And we have found the answer, so far, in solitude, in learning to be at home alone. But Schopenhauer had one more thing to say, and it is the warm heart hidden at the very center of his cold philosophy, and it is, in the end, the most important thing of all. He believed there was one true bridge between separate selves, one real overcoming of the distance, and its name was compassion. Recall the whole picture. We are each a form of the one will, sealed inside a separate body, seemingly cut off from every other, alone. This separateness, Schopenhauer thought, following the ancient wisdom of India, is, in a way, an illusion, the deepest illusion there is. At the level of appearance, in the world of space and time, we are many separate individuals, each isolated in our own skin. But at the deeper level, the level of the will, the thing in itself, we are not separate at all. We are one. The same single will lives in all of us, looks out through every pair of eyes, suffers in every suffering creature. The separateness is the veil. The oneness is the truth behind it. And compassion, Schopenhauer thought, is the moment when that veil grows thin, when the truth of our oneness breaks through into feeling. When you feel true compassion for another creature, when their suffering becomes, for a moment, your own suffering, felt directly, not as a thing you observe from outside, but as a pain you share from within, something extraordinary has happened. The wall between self and other has, for that moment, dissolved. You have stopped experiencing the other as a separate being over there, and have begun to experience their suffering as if it were happening to you. Because at the deepest level it is. The one will that you are is the same one will that they are, and in compassion that underlying identity rises into feeling, and the illusion of separateness is, for a moment, overcome. This is why Schopenhauer thought compassion was the true foundation of all morality, the real root of every genuinely good act. Not duty, not reason, not the fear of punishment or the hope of reward, but this direct feeling of another's suffering as one's own, this momentary dissolving of the barrier between selves. When you help another creature out of true compassion, you are not calculating, not obeying a rule. You are responding to a suffering that you feel directly, because in that moment you and the other are not fully separate. Compassion is the will recognizing itself in another form and moving to relieve its own suffering wherever it finds it. It is the one true bridge across the terrible distance between selves, the one real overcoming of the loneliness we began the night with. And notice what this means for the whole problem of the porcupines. All night we have spoken of the impossibility of pressing selves together without wounding, of the need to keep a careful distance. But compassion is a closeness that does not wound, because it is not the pressing together of two separate wanting selves, quill against quill. It is the dissolving of the very separateness that made the quills a problem. In compassion, you do not approach the other as a separate being whose closeness threatens you. You recognize the other as, in the deepest sense, yourself. And in that recognition, there is a warmth without wounding, a closeness that does not injure, because it is not two selves colliding, but one will recognizing itself. It is the one form of connection that escapes the porcupine's dilemma entirely. Hold that in the deep quiet of the night. Underneath all the separateness that has made you lonely, underneath all the distance and the wounding, there is a truth that you are not, finally, alone at all. That the same life that looks out through your eyes looks out through every other. That in your compassion for any suffering creature, You touch a oneness deeper than all the separateness. That is a warmth that no quills can spoil. Rest in it. We are all, in the end, one thing, briefly wearing the mask of many. Sleep now, held by that. We deepen it next. Chapter 37. Of how seeing yourself in the suffering of another. Let us stay with compassion a while longer, because it is the warm center of everything, and because there is a particular practice hidden in it that can soften the heart of even the most wounded and solitary person, and a soft heart sleeps better than a hard one. Schopenhauer's insight was that compassion works by a kind of seeing through. Ordinarily, we see other people as fundamentally other, as separate beings whose interests may conflict with ours, whose suffering is their business and not ours, whose distance from us is absolute. This is the ordinary consciousness of the separate self, and it is the source of most of our coldness toward one another, our indifference, our competition, our cruelty. As long as the other is truly other, their pain need not touch us. But sometimes the seeing shifts. You look at another creature in its suffering, and something in you recognizes suddenly that this is not fundamentally other at all, that the fear in its eyes is the same fear you have felt, that the pain in its body is pain you know from the inside, that underneath the difference of face and circumstance, it is the same helpless, suffering, striving life that you are, caught in the same predicament, wanting the same relief, dreading the same end. And in that recognition, the wall of otherness dissolves, and you feel their suffering as your own, because you have seen that at the deepest level it is your own, the same suffering of the same one will, wearing a different face. This is not a sentiment to be manufactured, it is a seeing to be allowed. And it is available, Schopenhauer thought, toward all suffering creatures, not only toward the people close to us, but toward strangers, toward enemies, toward animals, toward every form of life caught in the striving and the suffering of the will. Indeed, he had a particular tenderness toward animals, unusual for a philosopher of his time, precisely because he saw in them the same suffering will that lives in us, the same fear, the same wanting, the same helplessness before pain and death. And he thought that cruelty toward them was as real a moral horror as cruelty toward human beings, because it was cruelty toward the same one life. And here is the quiet transformation this can work in a lonely heart. The person who has been wounded by closeness, who has retreated into solitude, who has grown wary and guarded and cool toward other people, can find in compassion a way back to warmth that does not require the dangerous pressing together of the porcupines. You do not have to fling yourself into intimacy to feel the warmth of connection. You can feel it purely through compassion, through the recognition of your own suffering self in every other suffering creature. You can walk through the world alone, guarding your solitude, keeping the wise distance, and still be full of warmth, because your warmth flows not from clinging to particular others, but from the deep recognition that you and all suffering things are one. This is a connection that asks nothing, demands nothing, wounds nothing, and it is available even to the most solitary soul. Tonight, let your heart soften toward all the suffering creatures who lie awake as you lie awake, all the striving, frightened, longing lives that share this dark with you, near and far, known and unknown. Let yourself feel, gently, that you are not separate from them, that the ache in you is the ache in them, that the same one life suffers and longs in all of you together. There is a strange comfort in this, the comfort of a loneliness dissolved not by getting closer to any one person, but by recognizing that at the deepest level you were never truly separate from anyone at all. Rest in that recognition. It is the warmest thing there is, and it asks nothing of you but to be felt. Sleep now, one among the many that are, in truth, one. Chapter 38. The Ethics of the Porcupine. Let us gather what we have learned about compassion and distance together now into a single practical wisdom, an ethics of the porcupine, a way of being with others that honors both the need for warmth and the reality of the quills. The porcupine's dilemma, remember, is that we need closeness for warmth and are wounded by closeness because of our quills, and the solution is the wise middle distance at which warmth is possible and wounding is minimized. But we can now see that there are, in fact, two different ways to be close, and that they follow completely different rules. The first way is the pressing together of two separate wanting selves, and this is the way that must observe the careful distance. When you approach another person as a separate individual, with your own needs and wants and quills, and they approach you as another separate individual with theirs, then closeness is dangerous, and the wise distance, the courtesy, the reserve, is necessary to keep the wounding within bounds. This is most of ordinary human relationship, and for it, Schopenhauer's counsel of measured distance is exactly right. Do not demand too much closeness. Keep enough of yourself in your own keeping. Honor the other's separateness and guard your own. Hold the wise middle distance, and the warmth can last. But there is a second way to be close, and it follows the opposite rule, and it is the way of compassion. When you approach another not as a separate self whose closeness threatens yours, but through the recognition of your shared and single life, then the rule of distance no longer applies, because there are no longer two separate selves to collide. In compassion, the closer you come, the less you wound, because the closeness is not the pressing of quill against quill, but the dissolving of the very separateness that made the quills a danger. Here, unlike everywhere else, you can come as close as you like, and the closer you come, the more warmth and the less wounding, because you have passed beneath the level of the separate wanting selves to the level of the one shared life. So the ethics of the porcupine has two rules, and wisdom lies in knowing which applies. In the ordinary meeting of separate selves, keep the wise distance, honor the quills, do not demand too much, but cultivate, underneath and alongside this, the deeper compassion that dissolves separateness altogether, and pour as much of that as you can into all your dealings, because it is the one warmth that never wounds. The best human relationships, The rare, deep ones we spoke of are precisely the ones where these two combine, where a wise and courteous distance at the level of the separate selves is filled and warmed by a deep compassion at the level of the shared life. The distance keeps the quills from wounding. The compassion supplies a warmth that no distance can chill. This is how you can be, at once, a person who guards their solitude and keeps the wise distance, and a person full of warmth toward all the world. There is no contradiction once you see the two levels. On the surface, keep your careful distance, honor the separateness, protect your peace. Underneath, let your compassion flow without limit, recognizing your one shared life with every creature. The distance protects you from the wounding of the separate selves. The compassion connects you warmly and without wounding at the deeper level where all selves are one. Live at both levels, and you have solved, as far as it can be solved, the ancient dilemma of the porcupines. Rest with this tonight. You may keep your distance and still be full of love. You may guard your solitude and still be warm toward all the world. The wise distance and the boundless compassion are not enemies. They are the two hands with which a person holds the difficult gift of being among others. Sleep now, keeping your distance, full of warmth, at peace with both. We turn, next, toward the deepest and strangest of Schopenhauer's paths, the denial of the will itself. Chapter 39. The denial of the will. We come now to the highest and most difficult reach of Schopenhauer's thought, the place where his philosophy touches the mystical wisdom of the saints and sages of every tradition. It is the idea he called the denial of the will, and though it sounds forbidding, at its heart it is something very simple and very peaceful, and worth resting in as the night deepens. We have said that the will is the endless striving at the root of all suffering, and that the ways out of suffering, beauty, contemplation, compassion, are all moments when the will falls briefly silent and we are released. But Schopenhauer asked whether there might be something more than these brief releases, whether a human being might come not just for moments, but as a settled condition of the soul, to a place beyond the striving of the will altogether, whether one might, in a sense, turn and face the will and quietly refuse it, letting go of the whole endless wanting, and finding, on the far side of that letting go, a peace deeper than anything the satisfaction of desire could ever give. This is what he saw in the saints and mystics and holy renunciates of the world's great traditions, the ones who had turned away from the endless pursuit of desire and found in that turning away a great and shining peace. They had not gotten everything they wanted. They had done the opposite. They had ceased to want, had let the whole grasping machinery of desire fall still, had renounced the striving self and its endless hunger, and in that renunciation they had found a serenity that the whole world's getting could never buy. They had denied the will, and in denying it had escaped its tyranny, and had come to rest in a peace beyond all the swinging of the pendulum, a peace that Schopenhauer, reaching for words, could only gesture toward with the old language of the mystics, a peace that passes understanding, an ocean stillness of the soul. Now, this highest renunciation is not something to be forced or manufactured, and Schopenhauer knew it. It comes, when it comes, as a kind of grace, a quieting of the will that happens in a soul made ready by much suffering and much seeing. But even those of us who will never reach the full and settled denial of the will can taste its direction, can lean toward it, can find in its logic a profound relief. For the whole teaching points in one direction, toward the laying down of grasping, the release of the endless wanting, the quiet letting go of the striving self, and that direction is one we can move in even a little, even tonight. And here is where it comes home to the sleepless hour, most simply of all. Every night, in falling asleep, we perform a small and temporary denial of the will. We lay down all our wanting. We let go of every striving, every plan, every grasping after what we do not have. We release the whole apparatus of desire and let ourselves sink into a stillness beyond all wanting. Sleep is the will laid down for the night, the striving surrendered, the grasping released, and in it we find, every night, a version of the peace the mystic sought, the peace beyond desire, the deep, still ocean, where the pendulum no longer swings. Falling asleep is the nightly grace of the will denied. So tonight, let go. Not just of this worry or that plan, but of the whole grasping, the whole endless wanting, the whole striving self. Let it all be laid down, released, surrendered into the dark. Want nothing, grasp at nothing. Strive for nothing, not even for sleep. Simply let the will fall still, let the striving cease. Let yourself sink into the deep peace beyond all wanting that has been waiting beneath the noise of desire your whole life long. That letting go is the highest thing Schopenhauer pointed toward, and it is also, tonight, simply the way into sleep. Release the will, sink into the stillness, rest, we near the end now. Let us gather the warmth we have found. Chapter 40. What the quiet ones know. As we begin to turn toward the close of the night, let us pause and gather what the quiet ones, the solitary ones, the ones like Schopenhauer who learn to live alone and think deeply, actually come to know that the hurrying world does not. For there is a wisdom that only solitude teaches, and it is worth naming plainly before we let the night carry us down into sleep. The quiet ones know, first, that most of what the world chases does not satisfy. They have stepped far enough out of the race to see it clearly, the endless striving after getting and having and being seen, and they have seen that it leads nowhere, that the pendulum swings on forever, that no amount of getting fills the wanting. And this seeing, which looks like pessimism from the outside, is actually a great liberation. Once you truly see that the race has no finish line, you can stop running and step to the side and rest. The quiet ones have stopped running. That is much of their peace. The quiet ones know, second, that solitude is not the enemy but the home. They have discovered through necessity or through wisdom, that being alone can be the richest condition of all, the place where the mind is free, where beauty can be beheld, where the deep things can finally be heard beneath the noise. They have furnished the inner room and found it inexhaustible. They no longer flee their own company because they have discovered that their own company, rightly kept, is the finest and most faithful there is. This too is much of their peace. The quiet ones know, third, that the deepest connection is not the loudest. They have learned that the shallow warmth of the crowd is a small thing, pleasant but thin, and that the real warmth comes only rarely in the deep meeting of a kindred mind, or, more reliably and more universally, in the quiet flowing of compassion toward all suffering life. They do not chase connection frantically because they have learned where it actually lives, in the rare deep meeting and in the boundless compassion, and not in the noise of much company. And so they can be alone without loneliness, and warm without clinging, and this balance, this reconciliation, is the deepest of their peace. And the quiet ones know, finally, the thing hardest to say, which is that the letting go of wanting is the doorway to a peace that all the getting in the world could never buy. They have tasted, in their solitude, in their contemplation, in their moments of self-forgetting beauty and compassion, the stillness that comes when the will falls silent, and they have learned to lean toward it, to make a home in it, to prize it above all the frantic satisfactions the world offers. They have learned that peace is not something you get. It is something that remains when you stop grasping. And this, the deepest thing the quiet ones know, is the thing this whole night has been trying gently to give you. You are one of the quiet ones tonight, whether or not you usually think of yourself that way. Lying here in the dark, alone with your own mind, awake in the stillness while the world sleeps, you are in exactly the condition where this wisdom is learned. So let yourself learn it. Let yourself see that the race does not satisfy, that your solitude is a home, that the deepest warmth asks no clinging, and that peace is what remains when the grasping stops. These are the things the quiet ones know, and you are quiet now, and the knowing is available to you here, tonight, in the dark. Rest into it. We turn now, in the last chapters, back toward the world and the people in it, carrying all we have found. Sleep is very near. Let us gather the last of the warmth, chapter 41. Choosing your quills. As we come toward the close, let us return one last time to the porcupines and to a practical question we have not yet fully faced. If closeness always comes with some wounding, and the wise distance minimizes but never fully removes the quills, then how do we choose whom to come close to at all? For not all quills are equal, and not all wounding is the same, and there is wisdom in choosing carefully whose sharp edges you are willing to bear. Schopenhauer, for all his counsel of distance, did not mean that we should keep everyone equally far. He meant that we should be wise about closeness, and part of wisdom is discernment, choosing well whom to draw near. Some people's quills are the ordinary, unavoidable quills of any separate self, the small frictions and stings that come simply from two real people being near. These are the quills you accept in anyone worth being close to, because the warmth is worth them. But other people's quills are something else. Cruelty dressed as honesty, contempt, the deliberate wounding of a soul that takes pleasure in wounding, or simply an incompatibility so deep that closeness brings far more injury than warmth. And these quills you are not obliged to bear. The wisdom of the porcupine is not only the wise distance, it is also the wise choice of which fire to sit beside. This is worth saying clearly, because a gentle and self-doubting person can take the whole lesson of the night the wrong way, can conclude that since all closeness wounds, they must simply endure whatever wounding comes, must accept cruelty as the price of not being alone. That is not the lesson. The lesson is that ordinary closeness comes with ordinary quills, which are worth bearing for the warmth. But that extraordinary wounding, cruelty, contempt, the steady injury of a person who does not care for you, is not the price of connection, but a sign that this particular fire is not worth its cold. You are allowed to move away from the porcupines whose quills are cruelty. You are allowed to choose the huddle you sit in. And there is a further discernment, subtler still. Even among good people worth being close to, there are different distances that suit different souls. Some people can bear more closeness than others before the quills begin to wound. Some kinships can survive daily contact, and others are best kept at the distance of an occasional meeting, warmer for the space between. Part of the wisdom of the porcupine is learning, without shame, the distance at which each of your relationships actually flourishes, and honoring it, rather than forcing every closeness into the same shape. The friend you love best at arm's length is not a lesser friend. They are simply a friend whose fire warms you best from a certain distance, and there is no failure in knowing that and keeping to it. So, as you lie here, you might let your mind move, gently and without anxiety, over the people in your life, and feel, without judgment, the distances that suit each one. The ones whose quills are worth bearing for the warmth they give, the ones best loved from a little further off, and, perhaps, the ones whose wounding has never been worth its cold, from whom it is not a failure but a wisdom to move away. There is no need to decide anything tonight. This is only a gentle feeling toward, in the safe dark, of the shape your own huddle wants to take. Choose your quills wisely, and you will be wounded less and warmed more. And that is much of the art of a peaceful life. Rest now. We near the very end, and it is warm here. Sleep is close,